Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
The men smiled shyly. It may sound absurd, but actually, I'm a demon hunter. Demon hunter. Hao Ren heard a sudden noise in his ears. He turned around and saw that Lily had stopped eating. Whereas, the vampire maiden was wiping away the sauce stain on her face before saying in a quivering voice, "What did you just say?" I knew it. Exactly the response I had expected. There was a sense of helplessness in the men. Your reaction isn't a surprise to me. I had it worse when I told people about myself previously. I mean it when I say I'm a demon hunter. Have you ever watched the movie Van Helsing? What I do is more or less the same as depicted in the movie. Just that, we hunt demons in a totally different way. The tall man sounded dead serious as he talked about himself. Hao Ren slid his butt backwards on his chair to try to keep a distance from the men. He had too many questions in his mind. The man's a demon hunter. Is he real or just some charlatan? People would have laughed if off, but not Hao Ren. He had deeper thoughts than them. He knew demon hunters existed. At the same time, he did not take the man's word at face value, as the men could have been joking. He figured no demon hunter in their right mind would advertise their presence like this dude did. "So, you're not going to believe me, are you?" The man helplessly spread his hands out. "I can't blame you though. Look, being a Chinese, it would have been more convincing if I claimed to be a lay monk from Mount Wutai. But I'm not claiming to be anything more than I am. Also, the term demon hunter may sound westernized, but in reality, it's extracultural. We've been in existence since the emergence of the four great, ancient civilizations." Hao Ren and Vivian looked at each other. They both felt that there was some truth in the man's words. Demon hunters were thought to be from the West. People did not know that they had been roaming the surface of the earth since time immemorial. In ancient China, they were known as Taoists. In other parts of the world, they were called sorcerers or priests. However, true demon hunters would never identify themselves as such. Yet, what this man said was very close to the truth, a truth that most would not acknowledge. "Mr. Demon Hunter." Lily had finally turned her focus away from her plate. She had never seen a real demon hunter but had heard a lot of horrific stories about them, so she was nervous. Demon hunters are real. At last, Lily wised up. She was slick with her tongue. People in general regard demon hunters as an urban legend or character from horror stories. The men smiled slyly. But they are as real as they get. And there are still many people who believe in the existence of paranormal entities, hence, the practice of exorcism in some places. Rightly, my job is to drive out demons. That explains my presence here. I'm here to investigate the paranormal events in York Ford. In that sense, your job is supposed to be confidential. I can't fathom, how could you be so conspicuous in your approach? Vivian posed her question in a composed manner. She had suspected there was something behind this man's haste in revealing his identity. It did not matter whether the man was genuine or not. The fact was, his high-profile presence had already defied all logic. People of such profession would have preferred to lay low. Announcing oneself in such a conspicuously was never the way normal demon hunters behaved. Had he become jobless just like her and had to advertise himself to get hired? Hao Ren did share her thoughts in a way. When did demon hunters become so high-profile? Did all superheroes not wear some kind of mask to keep things clandestine? Look at Hao Ren, he never went around announcing to the world that he was a glamorous agent from heaven. Of course, he had a protocol to follow, which he did not mention. "There's nothing secretive about it," the men said in a matter-of-fact manner. "My job isn't something despicable. Even fortune tellers have their own websites. So why can't we demon hunters talk about our work openly?" Hao Ren and Vivian looked at each other, trying to synchronize their reactions and stay under the radar. Within seconds, they locked their eyes in a shared understanding. They pretended to be a naive audience who had found the story interesting but unbelievable. Vivian, in her thoughtful smile and distant manner, asked, "So, you're going to slay all those ghosts in the castle, aren't you?" The man's zeal was somewhat dampened, but he still smiled. I need to assess the situation there before taking any action. I know you're not going to believe me. And I don't expect you to. But, we could travel together anyway. I could be your tour guide. Why don't we catch a train tomorrow morning? We'll be there by evening, before you know it. Hao Ren was hesitant. He felt like he needed a day or two to recover from the jet lag. However, before he could spell it out, Vivian had already taken the liberty of accepting the invitation on his behalf. That's great. It's very nice of you to be our guide since we aren't familiar with the route. By the way, what's your name? I'm Nangong. That's my last name. The man rose to his feet and said, for some reason, I can't tell you my first name now. Anyway, do call me Nangong. I'll see you guys at 6:30 tomorrow morning in this restaurant. And then we shall depart. I'll only wait for 15 minutes tops, the train doesn't wait. Just as Hao Ren was about to tell the man that he possibly could not make it that early, Vivian jumped the gun again, nodding. Okay, Mr. Nangong. See you at 6:30 tomorrow morning. Oh yeah, please allow me to introduce myself, I'm Vivian, this is. Hao Ren stared blankly at Vivian. She was talking to the demon hunter as if it did not concern her one bit. After Nangong left them, Hao Ren managed to ask, aren't you afraid of the demon hunter? No, he doesn't look like one. Vivian sat back down as Nangong walked out of the restaurant. She took a short breath and said, frankly, we need a guide. He's going to York Ford, just like us. So, it would be way better if we follow him there, figure out his motive, and then make up some excuse to part with him rather than going on our own and bumping into him in York Ford. It'd be kind of awkward. Of course, this would be the case if he were a demon hunter. However, if he's only a charlatan, things will be a lot easier since he won't be a threat. We'll just get him to lead us there and then we'll be done with him. Vivian's analysis of the situation was very much on point, and Hao Ren also could not deny the fact that she was more far-sighted than he was. Nonetheless, he was not done with his questions yet. He asked, Vivian, could you tell whether someone's a demon hunter or not? If Nangong's a real demon hunter, there has to be something distinct and recognizable. Apart from his look, could you tell by any other means? Vivian frowned as she stared into the distance. It's kind of hard to tell. Demon hunters are like predators. They're sly and good at concealing themselves. And that was exactly how my clan was wiped out when a demon hunter infiltrated us by posing as one of our slaves. As a first-class blood clan member myself, I have the ability to differentiate a demon hunter's blood from others. But first, you need to get his blood, which I think isn't an easy task. There was a pause. She felt that as difficult as it was, she also had her pride to think about. So she continued, albeit unsure. Well, now that we're on it, I did feel something amiss about him. During the last battle between the Blood Clan and the Demon Hunters, I hurt my right hand. Since then, I sort of acquired some mystic ability. My hand would get hot whenever a Demon Hunter is present. Oh, really? I think your hand's just dipping into the hot soup now. Ouch. Whether Mr. Nangong was a real demon hunter, a very experienced swindler, or a delusional crackpot, chances of him being that were not that high. Neither Hao Ren nor Vivian could come to a conclusion after hours of discussion. Vivian said she had an instinctual reaction to demon hunters, owing it to her hand injury. However, she concurred that her instincts may or may not have been right. As such, it could not be used as concrete evidence against him. As for Lily, he may as well just forget about it. She had never even met a demon hunter before. Lily was like a baby in Vivian's eyes, and if they were assaulted by a demon hunter, she doubted Lily would be able to react in an effective manner at all. According to Vivian's explanation, demon hunters were quite literally part human, part monsters. They were able to unleash supernatural abilities during combat and even mutate depending on the situation. Not forgetting their ability to blend into the crowd like normal humans without giving away any aura or scent, which could have exposed them. That ability was a trump card demon hunters had against the supernaturals. How Nangong carried himself felt wrong to Vivian. It was unlike a demon hunter. The way he boasted about his job so openly differed a lot from the demon hunters who plagued her in the past. Nevertheless, she could not totally discount the fact that he was the real deal, given that she had never met one in ages. Even the ones she had met comprised just a small group among a vast group of hunters. She did not know them particularly well and her memory was no different than a senile old woman. Not to mention her streak of bad luck. Hao Ren really hoped that her bad luck did not rub off on him for them to meet a real demon hunter on the first day of the mission. This left Hao Ren pretty nervous. The three of them were pretty listless in England, given their unfamiliarity with the place. While they had solved the issue regarding the language barrier, the journey itself had taken a toll of them and even Lily was too lazy to move about. So, they went back to the hotel after lunch. Lily was now slouched on the lounge sofa fiddling with the TV remote. She seemed to be enjoying herself despite not being able to understand a single word. Vivian, on the other hand, was doing something surprisingly useful. She had taken out the cash stock Hao Ren had prepared for the trip. She was counting them over and over again. Hao Ren looked at Vivian alarmingly and then sat as close to her as possible. He stared at Vivian's thin, pale hands without blinking. He was afraid that if he moved his attention away, the pile of cash would just disappear into thin air due to her bad luck. Hao Ren had realized the gravity of Vivian's bad luck with money, and bad luck was a serious understatement when describing the facts of the matter. It was almost like the will of the universe or an effect of the laws of nature. Allowing Vivian to touch money would trigger an adverse psychological reaction in him. Vivian was eagerly counting the stack of cash. Then, she sighed. Hey. It's really a rare moment to be able to be spendthrift. So, this is how counting money feels like. Following Mr. Landlord was the right choice. Can you stop being so fidgety, Mr. Landlord? I told you that you can just call me Hao Ren when we're outside. Hao Ren gave Vivian a frozen smile. Sides, I have my reasons for being nervous. By the gods, if I looked away for one moment, you could somehow lose all of our spending money. Can you do something more productive? At first, I was wondering why you emptied my wallet. You're just gonna sit here and count money. Could you possibly even understand the feeling of someone who's been broke for millennia? Vivian took a long, deep sigh. The last time I had the chance to count money like this was during the Republic era. I was carrying a gunny sack to buy rice and I actually stood by the doorway to count the silver notes, but it doesn't feel as good as now. Paper then was as good as waste paper. They don't hold water to how this British pound feels. Humph. I'm done counting this stack. Let me count it again. Oh come on Hao Ren, just let me count it one more time, please. Hao Ren adamantly decided to put the cash back into his wallet and into his pocket. He went, my dear Ms. Vampire, if you really want to count money, we'll go to Zimbabwe someday so that you can count your heart out. As of now, please do something useful for once. Say, about that demon hunter stuff, why are you no longer nervous about it? I've already been through so much for so long, so why should I keep worrying about small matters like this? Vivian looked at Hao Ren's wallet forlornly as it bulged in his pocket. She then quickly shifted her gaze elsewhere as she went, by the way, do you know how a real demon hunter looks like? Hao Ren perked up with interest in the topic. How do they look like actually? Based on what I've seen thus far, they prefer black garbs when they are out hunting. Earlier they had a hunter get-up and later on, some tight-fitting, Western-style clothes. Those from the East wore something out of the kung fu flicks. They looked about as drab as one could be. Otherwise, they look and dress pretty much like normal people do. That aside, they are also usually rather shady and reserved, consciously hiding their identities to avoid detection. Don't even start about divulging their identities. Some will even kill innocents if they suspect that their identity has been compromised. Additionally, the hunters are very good at blending in, at being normal. They are somehow able to assimilate into the crowd, regardless of time and age. When people were burning witches, they joined in. When Napoleon was at his prime, they sang praises about him and so on. As you can see, they are masters at hiding their identities. How the people look like on the streets, that's how they'll look like with layers and layers of false impressions as well as identities. Hence, I really don't think that Mr. Nangong is of any real threat. No self-respecting demon hunter would boast about their trade, even in the harshest of times. It's almost a taboo in their creed. Vivian nodded as she finished explaining. So, I think we are just being overly nervous now. I'm nervous about the hunters and you are nervous about your first mission. I think we just got scared silly by a swindler of an exorcist. Hao Ren nodded in agreement. That's true, but should we really just take it easy now? Precautions are still a must. Vivian shook her head. While the guy certainly doesn't look like a real demon hunter, I think he may have met a real one before since he did know about their origins. The work that he talked of seems legitimate as well. I'm guessing he could be the pawn of a real demon hunter. Those sly bastards will pull this trick at times. So, let's just be careful not to let that Mr. Nangong detect anything unusual. Otherwise, I don't think he poses much of a threat. We are here to look for someone, not fight, after all. Hao Ren concurred, and the whole discussion on Nangong ended there. At this point, Lily had gone through all of the channels and could not understand what was on TV. Looking bored, she threw the remote control aside and clambered towards Hao Ren's back. "Hey, Mr. Landlord, can you talk Raven 12345 into giving each of us an MDT? You'll never know if you will meet a new person in the near future. If that person ends up being a foreigner, it would be very embarrassing if you don't understand him." Hao Ren sniggered. The dumb werewolf had finally thought of something actually useful. Well, it was more for understanding the TV program she was watching. However, it was a pretty convincing argument. While he was getting ready to explain about the team system, something on the TV caught his attention. The Yorkford Castle near Brushire has been attracting a good number of supernatural enthusiasts as of late. Hao Ren quickly turned to look at the TV program and saw that an interview was going on. A blonde, blue-eyed Caucasian woman was standing by the broadcast van with a microphone. Behind her was a rock-littered plain with a complex of ruins near the far end. Beside her was a short, stocky old man in a white t-shirt. He obviously did not look like a TV crew member. The man sported a full-face beard and was slightly bald. His shirt looked a little worn. He seemed like a local farmer in the midst of being interviewed. "Now, we are looking at Yorkford Castle. It very much fell into ruin, so we can't actually see the actual structure. As there are no roads leading up to the ruins, the broadcast van can only stop here. I will be going into the castle ruins in a moment to let those of you at home have a close-up view of the building." The female interviewer explained the current scenario and gestured to a stocky, old man. Mr. Angus here was the first person who cited supernatural happenings in the castle. The stocky bloke on TV looked about 40 to 50 odd, Hao Ren guessed. He was a proprietor of a small inn, living on the edge of Brushire. The local, named Angus, had encountered supernatural happenings in the ruins and had spread the news to attract visitors. His decent and honest guise was a perfect cover, seeing that he was a business-minded man. Hao Ren was so engrossed with the interview that he did not notice Lily, who was scratching him with her claws. The werewolf couldn't understand a single word and was close to throwing a tantrum. "I was clearing the room on the second floor that night." Mr. Angus' face was flushed as red as a tomato on camera. His excitement was apparent as he narrated his supernatural encounters. The popularity of his inn has grown following the supernatural ruckus. To him, this is nothing but good news. "My inn is just on the edge of the town. Angus Lodge is the first building you'll see if you are coming in from the highway. There are windows at the back of the inn directly facing the castle ruins. It is still a mighty distance away, so you can't really see the rocks. But that night, I saw a pillar of flame in the general direction of the ruins. There's nothing there, no trees nor houses, just a pile of rocks. Since I did not know what was it that actually caught fire, I gave 999 a dial." "Did many saw the pillar of flame?" The interviewer interrupted to refocus on the topic at hand. The man was very eager to stay on camera and would have gone on had she not stopped him. "Oh yes, yes. The part of the town facing the ruins was lit up." Mr. Angus nodded. "I even checked with the others around when it happened again the day after. It lit up for a good 10 minutes or so and before vanishing, as though it was never there. The fire service had went through the area and found only barren rocks in that vicinity. I'm very sure I did not make a prank call. I'm an honest businessman, you see. Angus Lodge is a long and proud product of honest." "I heard that you drove up to check the place out," the lady interviewer interjected. "Yes, I sure did, many times, even during the nights." Fear crept on his face. "During which I ran into some ghastly incidents. There was once this soldier in full steel armor marched in front of my car, screaming in a very strange voice. Other times the engine died for no reason, the radio played some very strange noise. They're the most horrifying encounters. The interviewer turned back towards the camera with her microphone. The supernatural tales of Brushire had since spread far and wide, attracting many adventurers and supernatural enthusiasts to this town, even catching the attention and interest of a few electromagnetic and geological researchers. Hao Ren's interest in the show had faded by then. It's pretty much a show that exhorts the curiosity of science and one that myth of the supernatural realm. He switched off the TV and sat in a stupor. Lily had pretty much lost her patience and was throwing a tantrum. She jumped onto the sofa and violently nudged Hao Ren's shoulders. Mr. Landlord, what was she talking about? I'm afraid our new friend is probably a ghost, Hao Ren said heavily. Remember the disturbance in a castle ruins that Mr. Nangong was talking about? It was the same as the one on the television show. If this is not something the locals cooked up to bring in tourists, it's definitely something connected to the new guy Raven 12345 talked about. My God, why does it have to be someone so troublesome? Vivian did not understand what's being said on TV, but she caught glimpses of what was on the screen and surmised. Wait a minute, that means that the Yorkford Castle ruins will be swarming with people, most of which are looking for ghosts. Yeep, that just complicates things, Hao Ren sighed. If I could help it, I would love to do without the unnecessary attention. Who knows if this new guy will play nice, like the both of you. Good grieves, if this guy turns out to be a bloody brat, it will surely get messy. Lily was squatting on the sofa for a good while now and with a loud clap, declared, I'm sleepy. Gonna go take a nap now. With that, she casually strolled towards her room as Hao Ren and Vivian looked on in disbelief. They only snapped back to their senses after hearing the door slammed behind her. Lily, that idiot, had still not gotten over her jet lag. It's bright daylight out there, but her biological clock was screaming bedtime. I'm pretty sleepy myself, Hao Ren yawned as he was finally overwhelmed by the long travel. It was partly due to seeing Lily go to bed. I'm gonna catch a short nap too, you're not sleepy. I'm fine, my routine is not the same as the both of you. Vivian shrugged. Sides, my biological clock is totally out of whack trying to match both your routines in these past few days. Anyway, I'm not sleepy at the moment. Fine then. I'm gonna catch a snooze. Wake me up if I'm not up by nighttime. We'll go out for dinner. As for Lily, I think she'll be dead asleep. We'll have to bring something back for her, said Hao Ren as he dragged himself into his bedroom. Vivian was the only person left in the lounge. She forlornly stared at the room that Lily had went into. She, a noble vampire, will have to share the bed with that shaggy dog, Lily, for the night. Hao Ren slept all the way till it was almost 9 at night. Vivian said she was hesitant to wake him up, seeing that he was sleeping so soundly. Lily, much the same, was about as dead as a log. She don't seem to have any intentions of getting over the jet lag. Lily didn't even move, not even when Vivian was pacing around in circles around her. As they have things to attend to early in the morning, Hao Ren and Vivian went down to the hotel's dining hall to have a quick meal. Lily was still drooling in her sleep when they got back to the room. She was probably not feeling hungry at all. Hao Ren then left the food that he had gotten for her on the table and went back to his room for more rest. He wanted to get over the jet lag by sleeping as much as possible that night. Vivian, being a vampire, had a rather different routine compared to humans and werewolves. She even got it messed up when staying at Hao Ren's place. Over here in England, she only started feeling sleepy close to midnight. By now, the smarter ones among you might have guessed it. Yep. Lily was awake. A human with normal physiology, a werewolf who didn't seem to have the slightest intentions of dealing with her jet lags, and a disorganized vampire who had fixed her biological clock. This trio's circadian cycles were in utter disharmony in a foreign land with an 8 hours time difference from China. When Hao Ren and Vivian were awake, Lily was asleep. When Vivian was sleepy, Lily was hopping about like a bunny. When Hao Ren was 2/3 into his sleep cycle, Vivian was awake and fresh. So when both Vivian and Lily were awake, Hao Ren was still asleep. Don't even bother trying to determine the times that all three of them are awake, as all three of them were equally confused. Technically, only 2/3 of the team were awake most of the time. When one was asleep, there will be one scurrying about the room like a ghost. Early the next morning, Hao Ren woke up with a crow's nest of a hair on his head. He ran into Vivian by the doorway, whose eyes were bloodshot. She immediately protested when she saw him. Hao Ren. I will not sleep in the same room with that big dog anymore. She woke up in the wee hours complaining of being hungry and spent the next 2 hours scurrying about in the dark in front of my bed. Hao Ren guessed that he was probably the only one who got the most out of his sleep, at least 10 hours by his estimation. As he groggily looked at Vivian, he said, "The room was unusually cold last night. Did you feel it? I tried turning off the aircon, it didn't help much. Have any idea what's going on?" Vivian said with a blush, I couldn't sleep before midnight, so I was doing some aerobic exercises in the lounge. Didn't notice anything strange though. Hao Ren was suddenly stricken by a chill down his spine. He gave a thought to Vivian's recollection and found it unnerving, a vampire quietly doing aerobics in the hall, and a werewolf stalking by the bed in the dark. The only component lacking here is a filming crew, and this would be the perfect ghost story. It was 6 in the morning. Hao Ren hastily washed his face with the cold tap water, to rid him of the grogginess from the 10-hour sleep. After washing up, he went down to the dining hall on the first floor, accompanied by a rather grumpy Vivian. On their tail was a zombified Lily who had been wide awake since midnight. Now as her nap time draws near, drowsiness overtook her again. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Mr. Landlord, I'm sleepy. And hungry too. I need lunch. And I need somewhere place to lay my head down. Lily mumbled, her voice was bereft of any strength. In her current state, she resembled a tired pet dog who refused to leave her master's side. Though feeling a strong urge to do it, Vivian could not muster the courage to take a jab at Lily. Lily still has her pride, even in such a pathetic state. She would still bite if you likened her to that of a pet dog. Even a metal cuirass would not save you from her jaws. It should be breakfast, not lunch, said Hao Ren as he looked out through the window into the gloomy dawn. Though London had left her smoggy industrial past, she still retained much of the foggy morns, the heavy clouds, and the unpredictable weather. The weather that morning was not looking good. Though the sun was already up by now, it was still rather gloomy outside. There should still be a thick veil of fog or overcast for the next few hours to come. Look, over there. Vivian pulled on Hao Ren's sleeve out of the blue. She pointed towards a table outside the restaurant. This Mr. Nangong seems to be very punctual. A rare quality amongst those who had dealings with demon hunters. Vivian had nurtured a dislike for Mr. Nangong as he seemed to have some ties with a demon hunter, or have 1% chance of actually being one. While she was not outright hostile towards him, she would find it hard faking a smile for him. After watching the news yesterday, I don't think we need the company of such a dangerous person. Hao Ren hesitated. Yorkford Castle will be swarming with people looking for ghosts, so there shouldn't be a need for a guide, right? Is that so? Vivian rolled her eyes. How then are you going from London to Brewshire? Hao Ren was taken aback for a moment. He had totally forgotten about that. By then, Mr. Nangong had also noticed the trio and rose to greet them with a friendly smile. Hao Ren, realizing that his opportunity to turn tail had passed, reluctantly led Vivian and Lily to greet him. Good morning. Good morning, you guys are early. Mr. Nangong quipped with a smile. Just then, his attention was diverted to Lily, who was still following them from behind half asleep. What's wrong with her? Still suffering from the jet lag, she's supposed to be having her afternoon nap. Hao Ren shrugged. So, are we leaving now, or should we have something first before we leave? Mr. Nangong gestured that it was still early and the train was not arriving any time soon. At that, Hao Ren decided to eat up since the hotel provides free breakfast buffet for its customers. Hao Ren why waste the hospitality, so he decided to eat his money's worth before checking out. During breakfast, Lily was close to falling asleep. Her eyes were almost shut already. Surprisingly, even in a state as such, she still managed to eat. Seeing that she could barely move, Hao Ren went to get a plate of food for Lily. She somehow finished breakfast with her eyes closed, putting her formidable sense of smell to good use. By the time she's done, the plate was squeaky clean. Nangong could only look on in amazement while Hao Ren and Vivian were shaking in their shoes. They were so afraid that the demon hunter would find out about Lily's true identity. But it seemed he was either a fake or an inexperienced newbie, as he only gasped in amazement at Lily's feet, not even suspecting that a demon was seated right next to him. After having their breakfast, Hao Ren went to the reception to complete the checkout procedure and they left lugging their bags. Though they did not have much luggage, it was still the man's job to lug it. Vivian, however, tied them onto Lily's back without batting an eyelid. The latter did not even flinch when the weight of the bags was suddenly added on her back. She was undoubtedly still asleep while she was snoozing. And so, the party departed with Lily as their coolie, tailing them in her slumber. The only good thing about her is her ungodly strength. It would be a waste to not make her a porter. Vivian waved her hand as Hao Ren gave her a quizzical look. Oh, don't you worry, she's volunteering. Though she's sleeping now. Hao Ren didn't feel right as he saw Lily lumbering about with their luggage in her sleep. He always had a soft spot for Lily, so he took the luggage instead. Forget it, I'll be carrying it. Stop bullying her. Lily, in her slumber, was actually still quite aware. Dan, Giu. Mr. Landlord. I am okay. Vivian wrinkled her nose in disdain. Oh, you men and your manliness, you lot never changed. Hao Ren let out a dry laugh and took a glance at Mr. Nangong. The self-proclaimed demon hunter was slender in build and his luggage looked much heavier than those of all three of them combined. It was even bigger than the luggage Lily was carrying when she first met Hao Ren. The rattling sound its wheels made as they rolled on the cement road was deafening. God knows what's in there. What's in there? Vivian, being the sly old fox that she is, don't let her hear you calling her old, quickly put on the charm of a curious young girl as she put forth a seemingly innocent question. Work-related, Nangong said as he dragged the luggage along. He somehow looked dignified in his clean white shirt and black slacks. One wouldn't be faulted for mistaking him for one of those successful entrepreneurs. I use them to fight evil. All the stuffs in there had taken down at least 100 foul beasts. A real demon hunter wouldn't have needed so many tools. Vivian whispered as she returned to Hao Ren's side. They are the weapon. Looks like we can relax for a bit. Hao Ren, preoccupied with another thought, was perplexed. They both were men, but how did Nangong resemble a businessman on a business trip while he himself looked like a total hobo? With that, both parties, each with schemes of their own, journeyed towards Brushire. Having someone who knew his way around was indeed a lifesaver. With Nangong's help, the trios never did not get lost within the labyrinth of streets in London and got on the train heading for Brushire without much hassle. The four were silent throughout the journey. As there were many strangers around them, Hao Ren and Vivian could not discuss anything sensitive and the journey was as dull as it could get. The only thing worth noting was that Lily finally woke up from her nap halfway through the ride and squirmed about for a good half of the journey. By the time the train pulled in at Brushire, she was already sleepy again. So much for being the most excited one before the trip. Since their arrival in London, she was either sleeping or doing nothing. As expected, she spent the rest of her waking hours strolling around the carriage. By the time they arrived at Brushire it was close to late evening. There were not many people at the station. Guess not everyone was interested in a ghost hunt in this remote countryside. The announcement over the PA speakers sounded familiar, much like the ones he heard back at home. Hao Ren realized that the station was more remote than he thought it would be. The train station was rather small with only 2 train tracks running through it. One of it was even abandoned. The meager station was bereft of almost everything except the barren plains surrounding it and the few wild scorched vegetation swaying in the wind. Not far from the station was a small town, Brushire. Its buildings looked so worn and aged that it looked more like a village than a town. Hao Ren had no idea how the town came to be, or why was it built in the middle of nowhere. This place reminded him of another place, somewhere familiar. Oh right, it was Raven 12345's office at Bastard Barrio. Nangong sniffed the air with a look of mischief on his face. I smell them. Nangong was standing on the platform of a countryside train station as a light breeze was blowing in his face. He took a deep breath and thought the air smelled like dried dirt. A hint of happiness could be seen on his elegant features, though they weren't altogether handsome. Can't you feel it? There's certain smell lingering in the air. His look gave Hao Ren the creeps as he felt that Nangong could be a time bomb. This demon hunter is really keen. He could sense the chill coming from the castle the moment he got off the train. I can't smell anything. Vivian sniffed. And the Yorkford Castle is still quite far from here, isn't it? Their scent can spread across a long distance, Nangong replied as he fixed his messy hair, looking rather happy. As a demon hunter, I excel in catching their scent. Of course you can't detect it. It takes lots of practice. All right, craps aside, we really need to find a place to rest as the sun is already setting. Nangong picked up his luggage and walked towards the slope at the end of the station. After he had walked for about 10 meters ahead of them, Lily suddenly opened her eyes and shouted nonsensically, "What smell are you talking about?" "Let me do the job, my nose is very sensitive." "You can just go back to sleep," jeered Vivian while slapping Lily on the back. "Oh," replied Lily, who did not take offense at it. She slumbered into a sleepwalk in seconds as the jet lag catch up to her. "I really don't smell anything," said Vivian while shaking her head from side to side as Hao Ren looked at her. "The Blood Clan has superb sensitivity to the sense of spirits. Yet I don't detect any odd scent at all. Plus, the Yorkford Castle is just too far away and it isn't after dark yet. Our hour of prime has yet to come. That self-acclaimed demon's hunter. Does he really have the ability in sensing unusual creatures? He wasn't even aware of our identities." Hao Ren rubbed his chin as he gave thought to what Vivian just said and finally surmised. "He is probably just boasting." "It could be," said Vivian. The station was located right on the outskirts of Brushire. The both were connected by a narrow country road. Unfortunately for this company of 4, there was no bus in sight, so they hitched a ride into town. It was almost dark when they entered the town. The last scarlet ray of setting sun was fading over the horizon. The streetlights in town lit up one after another. Nostalgia struck Hao Ren as he was gazing down the street in a foreign land. He was not really an outgoing person and thus rarely stays overnight outside, let alone going abroad. He had never thought that one day he would be standing here in a foreign land, 8 hours behind time, dealing with unfamiliar surroundings, people, lifestyle, and language. Though the last was easily solved with the help of the MDT, the rest remained as challenges. He folded his arms and sighed, missing his cozy home and his black little pet cat. He wondered how was Raleigh doing. It was probably out on the streets by now, mingling with stray dogs and cats. While Hao Ren was having a hard time adapting to the foreign land, Vivian had no problem with it at all. The vampire had gotten used to traveling around the world. She was enthralled by the scenery along the way from London to the Brushire. As if finally figuring it out, she blurted, "It doesn't seem to be as serious as it was in the news. There are not many outsiders here, therefore it could be that the situation was just exaggerated in the news or that the paranormal enthusiasts aren't here yet." After making sure that Nangong was far ahead and out of earshot, he whispered, "How can you tell?" "Just by listening to their heartbeats and smelling their blood. It's my strength." Vivian shrugged her shoulders and answered. "The heartbeat exposes one's emotion and the taste of blood reveals one's family ties and ancestry. Every creature native to a land has similar component in their blood. It can't be altered within a short period of time. Thus, I can vaguely sense how many among them are outlanders and the number of those whose hearts are restless. By combining these two sets of figures, I can estimate the number of people who came for the haunted castle. These are the absolutely necessary skills the Blood Clan must possess in order to hunt down their preys. Though I don't prey on humans, I still possess the natural gifts of the vampires." Vivian's words set off ripples of goosebumps under Hao Ren's skin. One could almost see the blood-red glow in her eyes, though speaking in her usual tone, the content of this vampiress speech really creeped the daylight out of you. This useless vampiress had finally gave us a glimpse of her true prowess as one belonging to the aristocrat of the Dark Knight. Though this helped her much in scouting and making sense of the current situation in town, she was still pretty much useless. Hao Ren turned to look at Lily, who was tailing them in her sleepwalk. This time, it's the stupid werewolf's turn to fall short of his expectations. This numbskull kept going on and on about the keenness of all her senses, especially her sense of smell, which was superb. Disappointingly, of all the times, she had to be sleeping now, and the best her sense of smell can do at the moment was to keep her from losing her way. "Anyway, it's a good that we don't have that many outsiders here at the moment." Hao Ren nodded and said, "Raven 12345 instructed us to go to the Yorkford Castle. She also said that both the client and we will be able to sense each other when we arrive at a certain place. However, she wasn't sure about the current state of the client. Therefore, it's better to have no irrelevant personnel on scene." "Are we departing at night?" Vivian frowned. I have the advantage in combat at night. The big dog will also be more alert after midnight. She would be a force to be reckoned with, more or less. Hao Ren curled his lip and thought. This is utter nonsense. I could knock the shit out of this piece of blood clan nobility with the simple toss of a brick. Isn't that something to be reckoned with? It depends. Let's observe the movements of the paranormal enthusiasts. We have to get into action before tomorrow night. The more we delay, the more will the number of people gathering here be, said Hao Ren. The growing crowd could work to our advantage. Vivian muttered. We can mingle with the crowd, telling them that we are here for the ghost hunt as well. Sometimes, the best guise is to act openly, as if we have nothing to hide. What if, in plain sight, a headless knight jumps out from the castle, holds onto me and starts calling out, "Landlord"? What if a hologram pop up into the air from my pocket saying, "Matching successful"? What if the new tenant we are about to meet is a loony, a troublemaker? I have to take into consideration my rotten luck and the unreliable Raven 12345 who claimed that backup will be always ready. If anything of these sort occurs, you will have to figure out a way to get me out of the MI5. Are you confident enough to help me jailbreak in England? Vivian nodded earnestly and said, I did it before. However, the prisons in England then had wooden fence and so I managed to sneak in via an underground tunnel. After knocking out about 10 knights, I rescued my sister from her cell. She was captured by a demon hunter. Let's not mention what happened back in the 1190s. Vivian was speechless. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted. Let's stay here tonight. It's getting late. We probably won't find any hotel further down the road. Nangong interjected. The last Hao Ren remember, the three of them were way behind Nangong. He looked up and saw that they had reached an inn. The inn was a 3-story building. It wasn't big but it looked clean, new, and beautiful with those white walls and blue tiles. Above the door, a line of words was flashed on a neon light signboard. With the help of the translation system, Hao Ren read it out as if he was reading in his mother tongue, Angus Lodge. Hey, what a small world. This was the same inn they heard about on the news yesterday. The boss of the inn should be the men who appeared on the news. 3 of them followed Nangong and entered the inn. There were 2 people behind the ground floor counter. One of them was a young lady who seemed to be the cashier while the other man was a chunky middle-aged man who looked decent and honest. He was the man they saw on the news. Yo, welcome to Angus Lodge. The men greeted them warmly and turned to look at the lady as he said proudly, look, another group of foreigners. Now we don't have to worry about business no more. Hao Ren was stunned and thought, even the British looks down foreigners as gullible tourists. It seemed that Vivian was right. Though the haunting of Yorkford Castle had attracted unnumbered paranormal enthusiasts from other places, the town was not too crowded yet. There were still 3 unoccupied rooms left, the last 3 available at Angus Lodge. The ideal arrangement would be 4 rooms for each of them respectively so that they could have their own rooms and not interfere with each other. Since there were only 3 rooms left, Vivian and Lily had no choice but to share a room. Needless to say, the vampiress was very much annoyed by the arrangement. She saw that Lily was still standing there, snoring. Therefore, she expected her to wake up in the middle of the night and repeat what she did last night, messing around while others need to sleep. She already gave up the notion that she would be able to have a good sleep as the girl who couldn't deal with the jet lag was around. After they got the key, Nangong, seeing that the boss wasn't busy with his customers, leaned against the counter to have a little chat with him. Hi, I have seen you on the news. You must be Mr. Angus, right? Is it true that there is a haunted castle nearby? Oh, you are quite fluent in English, at least better than that Indian monk over there. The boss seemed cheerful. As the owner of the inn, he was very easy to get along with and could strike up a conversation with anyone. Are you guys here for the castle as well? It has been a big happening in town recently. It was an ancient castle, almost forgotten. The same could be said of Brushire too if not for the recent haunting of the castle. In truth, it is a symbolic historical relic. Now, I'm afraid it's going to become a popular tourist spot after this. Truth be told, I'm an expert in this matter, Nangong said solemnly while straightening his collar. I'm a professional demon hunter from China and I'm here to eradicate the evil spirits in the castle. Hao Ren couldn't help but whispered in Vivian's ear, "This guy is really high profile, going around telling everybody about his job." The vampire girl snorted, without any comment. Seeing that the groggy Lily was about to crawl on the floor, she went over and held her by the shoulders, saying, "I will send her to the room first. Come meet me after you talk to them, we have something to discuss." Vivian then helped Lily to their room. The lodge keeper was amazed at Nangong's statement. "Oh, you're from the mysterious land of China. If I'm not mistaken, the ghost hunters over there were called. What's it again?" "Daoshi." To be honest, he was probably quite familiar with China as he pronounced the word Daoshi accurately in Mandarin. This time, Nangong didn't spend time to explain his job as a demon hunter. He just smiled, nodded and said, "I'm not a Daoshi, though I do know how to perform exorcism. I wonder if you have some time to spare to tell us about the story of the Yorkford Castle. It sounds very interesting." The lodge keeper was overexcited. He got his stumpy body out from behind the small counter effortlessly and led the two to a long table at the side which served as a resting corner for weary customers. "Of course I have. Take a seat and let's take our time. I had been telling the story of the castle for the past 2 days. Now, where should I start?" Let's start from the history of the castle," said Hao Ren as he was amused by the overexcitement on the face of the lodge keeper. It almost felt as if this chap would not give up the chance to share his story. "I know nothing of that castle. I didn't even know its exact location prior to this." The lodge keep was surprised. "Oh, your English is much better than mine." Let's focus on the story," said Hao Ren. After Hao Ren's gentle prompt, the attention-deficit lodge keeper started telling the story with much passion. It all started hundreds of years ago when an English nobleman established the settlement here in Brewshire. He then took more than 10 minutes explaining the history of the noble family. It was a tale full of love and hatred, ups and downs. The lord of the castle was likened to a knight of the Round Table. According to him, the nobleman and his family lived in the ancient Yorkford Castle for less than 200 years. Within the 200 years, the family went through a lot of highs and troughs, the feud with Palace, the rebellion from within Brewshire and wars without. In the end, the whole family collapsed under as a result of the rivalry between the 3 heirs. The eldest was killed on the throne of Yorkford Castle, the second died while battling the rebellion, and the youngest had gone missing. The family left countless of legends and tales behind. And the once flourishing Yorkford Castle had now become the biggest pending demolition project in the town. Yorkford was once prosperous. However, it was ruined by an insurrection. Numerous knights and soldiers were killed in that battle both outside and inside the castle. Their recovered remains were buried but some remained unfound. Many of these soldiers were trapped alive by the rebels in secret tunnels and cellars under the castle. After the family had passed on, nobody remembered the hidden rooms under the castle. Therefore, the soldiers who were trapped in the cellars and secret tunnels remained there. The lodge keeper smacked his lips and continued in an eerie tone. "It is said that those soldiers died down there and now they had come back to haunt the castle. There they were unable to lend their aid when the rebel army killed their lord. Thus, their souls were filled with hatred." Looking at Angus's expressive chubby face, Hao Ren thought that this bloke must have been a tour guide in his past life. There were secret tunnels and cellars under the castle. Was it like a huge labyrinth? Hao Ren asked curiously. Nangong interjected before Angus could speak. "It's quite common actually. In those days, the castles weren't just places for nobles to stay. They're also the last fortress during times of war. There will usually be huge cellars and secret tunnels extending in all directions under the castles. Some of the castles would even have tunnels which extended to the borders of the territory to allow their lords to escape as far away as possible in emergencies." Angus nodded in agreement with Nangong and added, "Most of the tunnels had collapsed. People have also forgotten about the existence of Yorkford Castle. Nobody is interested in it enough to explore it and therefore, nobody knows the secrets buried under the castle. Have you really seen the ghosts?" Hao Ren couldn't help his curiosity as he looked at the ruddy complexion of the lodge keeper. He didn't look as if he had seen ghosts. Who in the world would look so cheerful after bumping into ghosts? "Of course I did," said Angus as he raised his voice in reply. "You are not the first to doubt it. I swear, it is the real deal. I saw the souls of the knights in mysterious flames around the castle. It was a dreadful night. However, it also brought me lots of customers. So maybe it's not that bad after all. Hao Ren quickly reassured him that he trusted him when he saw that Angus was getting agitated. They continued to talk about the recent happenings in the vicinity of the castle. After a while, Hao Ren left them and went upstairs. His room was at the west end of third floor, right opposite of the girl's room, while Nangong's room was at other end of the corridor, far from theirs. When Hao Ren reached his room, Vivian was already waiting there. "Let's talk in your room," Vivian said while pointing at her room. "The big dog is dreaming now." She was gnawing on the table leg, so be prepared to pay for the damage tomorrow. "Why didn't you stop her?" Vivian showed him the bite mark on her arm and said, "Hee hee." Hao Ren had nothing to say. The condition of the lodge at the countryside was so bad compared to the luxurious hotel in central London. Each room was furnished with just a bed, a desk, and a chair. However, a room like this did more in helping him unwind and relax. Vivian and Hao Ren sat on the bed. He roughly told Vivian about the story he heard just now and was quite worried about it. "I heard that a lot of people are gathering around the castle. Many of which are crazy enough to bring their own tents or drive there in their motorhomes. They don't stay in the town but instead, encamp outside the castle, waiting to catch sight of the ghosts. It's no longer viable if we want to search for the client discreetly. That means to say that regardless whether we act tonight or tomorrow, there will be not much difference." Vivian blinked. "I was scouting that area just now and found something interesting," asked Hao Ren. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. "I've found something." Vivian snapped her fingers and a thin layer of fog started to form at a corner of the room. The fog quickly converged and transformed into bats, flying above and over Vivian's shoulders. For all the time spent with the two superwomen, Hao Ren had seen enough of their supernatural tricks, especially Lily's doggy tail and Vivian's pet bats. He played with one of the little bats, studying it and looking for differences from wild bats. "What did you find?" Hao Ren asked. "Leave the bats alone. They're duplicates of me. They share my senses," Vivian warned Hao Ren as she smacked away his hand. "I sent the bats out to the castle ruins. Something is in there, the aura of wraiths, of hundreds of years, and lots of them too." A chill rushed down Hao Ren's spine. Although he had been expecting his tenant to be a wraith, he could not help but shiver at the mention of the spooky thing. "Really? Lots of them? Raven 12345 told me there was only one tenant. Now what? Pick one. Hold your horse, Hao Ren. The wraith's aura isn't the same as the usual stuff we know of." Vivian shook her head. "These ones are buried underground and were discovered only when the bats went into a caved-in underground tunnel. I found no entrance or specific source of the aura, but I'm sure the wraiths are still contained in a completely intact environment. So, we can deduce from here that there should be no spirits roaming freely on the surface." Hao Ren quickly collected his thoughts and came to a conclusion. If the ghosts were already contained and buried underground, there shouldn't have been any movement in the castle. So, the sightings of paranormal activities. There's another possibility. If the wraith's power is strong enough, their aura could have been felt and seen by ordinary folks on the surface, causing hallucinations or even memory distortions. However, it's been donkey's years since such strong phenomenon last happened. I think the demon hunters would have cleaned up the place a long time ago. Hao Ren spread his hands in a self-deprecating gesture. "Why am I being dragged into this?" But he noticed that the expression on Vivian's face changed. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nangong is moving." Vivian frowned. "I have a bat hanging outside his window. I can see him prepping his gears. He's gone out. At this time of the night." Hao Ren was slightly surprised. "This guy's an eager beaver. He just got here. I think this demon hunter is really something." All the while, Hao Ren had not really taken Nangong seriously. Even if Nangong knew a thing or two about demon hunters, he could not have been anywhere near a pro, judging from his high-profile conduct. So, Hao Ren did not expect the guy to be so committed. It was not a quality a charlatan would normally possess. Vivian ran toward the windows without saying a word. She gestured Hao Ren to come over. "See. He's coming out of the door. I wonder how he's going to the castle." The castle is at least dozens of kilometers away. This dude isn't a local and certainly doesn't have a car. Moreover, no cab would ever want to go to that place at this time of the night. Does he know some kind of magic? Hao Ren and Vivian rested their hands on the ledge as they peeked out from behind the window. Nangong arrived and stood stiffly at the entrance of the lodge. Instead of a huge suitcase, Nangong was carrying a smaller one, black in color. He was in his customary white top and black pants, which the standard description of a salesperson. As Vivian had analyzed before, Nangong was not a local and he did not drive. How was he going to reach the castle dozens of kilometers away at that hour of the night? Demon hunters can move at a speed in excess of 100 kilometers per hour and some can even perform short-distance flight as well as near-field teleportation. Vivian frowned as she continued, he's making some weird hand gestures now. Does he really possess the power of magic? Hao Ren's mind was running wild as he imagined the kind of tricks Nangong was going to pull off, windwalking, ward possession, ancestral spirits, and whatnot. He would not have been surprised at all if a magic circle had popped up out of nowhere. However, his jaw dropped when a car pulled out from the garage behind the lodge. Angus, the fat owner of Angus Lodge, was behind the wheel. As the car pulled up in front of the entrance, Nangong nodded at Angus. At the same time, an Indian guy in a full monk's robe and a burly European in a Batman suit had walked out from the lodge, tailing Nangong into the car. Hao Ren could clearly see that they were chipping in for the fare. Vivian said sheepishly, carpooling, it seems like the lodge's owner is branching out into the transportation business. I guess I'm just thinking too much. Hao Ren thought. It seemed that the ruins attracted strange people from all over the world. It was not clear why these international paranormal enthusiasts came out in flocks. Probably because they had been waiting for such a moment for a long time. After Angus and the other demon hunters went on their way, Vivian nudged Hao Ren and said, "We'll set off too. Tonight." Hao Ren was baffled. "Didn't you say that we had to stay away from demon hunters, especially Nangong?" "I just changed my mind. I'm afraid that if any of them find the new tenant before we do, we'll be in trouble. I'm sure there will be more people like them coming. So, we can't afford to wait for the rush to subside. It could take days or even months. And things will get even more unpredictable by then." Hao Ren thought Vivian had a point, yet he was a bit worried as he glanced at the bedroom door. "I've had enough sleep myself, but Lily, she won't rise from her sweet dream any time sooner than midnight. Are we still taking her along or not?" Vivian checked her watch and said, "No worries, she'll be awake in a while. She has a weird talent, she can run while still remaining asleep. She'll be totally awake by the time we reach the castle." Hao Ren had no further concerns. He quickly followed Vivian into the room. Lily was tossing and turning in bed, but she was still in her day clothes. Apparently, she was taken to bed by Vivian while she was asleep and Vivian did not care to help her change into her nightgown. Nevertheless, it saved Hao Ren the trouble. Truth be told, Hao Ren was actually eagerly expecting to see the werewolf maiden donning a thin nightgown. But obviously, his wish was not granted. "Look, the table leg." Vivian pointed at the bedside table. Hao Ren immediately noticed something. One of the table legs had been gnawed in the middle. What was left behind was in the shape of a gourd. Chunks of wooden chips littered her bed and the floor beneath it. There was still a small piece jutting out the corner of Lily's mouth. Needless to say, Lily had had a dream about a bone feast. "Hey, wake up, big dog." Vivian violently shook Lily out of her bed. She was jolted awake by the abrupt fall before hitting the floor. She opened her eyes and vaguely saw Hao Ren there. She asked, "Landlord, is it breakfast time?" "No, it's medicine time." Vivian hauled Lily up. "Get ready. We're going to the castle. Just follow us. We'll explain everything when we get there." Still in her hypnagogic state, Lily mumbled an acknowledgement and fell into autopilot mode before uttering, "Landlord, I dreamed that you cooked some stewed ribs for me. It was finger-lickin' good." Hao Ren remained silent. 3 of them left the lodge unnoticed under the guise of Vivian's black fog. The lodge sat on the edge of the small town. Before long, they had already left the town and entered the vast wilderness. Suddenly, something came to Hao Ren's mind. "They have a car, but what about us? All of a sudden, a huge pair of bat wings stretched open from Vivian's and she took off with Hao Ren into the night sky. A broad smile was seen on her face. "We'll take a flight. Let the big dog run." The moon was a ghostly, silver disk, hanging in the lonely sky. The desolate wilderness was devoid of any human signs. The only sound heard was the flapping of Vivian's wings. The bat-winged vampire maiden swept through the air in the night sky. As the moonlight shone on Vivian, she turned into a moving, blurry shadow. Her vampire aura was completely hidden under the guise of the moonlight. As she was not sure whether the paranormal events in the castle had attracted real demon hunters, she had to remain on high alert and she used the power of the moonlight to camouflage. Hanging under Vivian's body, Hao Ren was agitated. "Actually, I wanted to say no to flying. At least give me some time." "Be sensible," Vivian was heard saying from above. "To work up to it. I'm acrophobic. My heart can't take it." "Well, you just have to overcome it." Vivian lowered her head to take a look at Hao Ren. Unapologetically, she said, "Enjoy the ride. Not everyone has the privilege to fly with the Blood Clan. You know, humans are simply heavy and troublesome." Hao Ren felt awkward being carried like that by the maiden. But on the bright side, no one saw it and it was a new experience for him, he thought. Initially, he was nervous. He was unsure whether the vampire maiden could handle his weight or not. If she lost her grip on him, he doubted the bio-enhancement given by Raven 12345 earlier could help him land in one piece. However, Vivian was no mortal. In terms of brute force, she was not comparable to Lily, but she could carry an adult and fly for dozens of kilometers at the same time. No sweat. They were flying high up in the night sky, but Hao Ren could clearly see the terrain under the moonlight. A tiny, silvery shadow was moving fast on the ground. It was Lily. She had transformed into a werewolf. Her silver, long hair and canine tail could be clearly seen. She was running on her four limbs to keep up with their pace. Amazingly, the werewolf maiden was running while sleeping. As if she was in autopilot mode, she could track the vampire's flight path solely based on her olfactory senses. Even Vivian could not hold back her admiration for the werewolf's unusual ability. Lily could have very well become one of the top brass in the werewolf world solely based on this special talent if not for her happy-go-lucky attitude. The trio arrived at Yorkford Castle in their unusual way. They mostly avoided the main road. Vivian even sent a bat to trail Angus' car. Nangong and the like had no idea they were being followed. He did not even bother to peek out from behind the car's window. There it is, the Yorkford Castle. Vivian broke the silence from above after a long flight. Hao Ren looked ahead and saw what was left of the castle. It was a pile of ruins, but judging from the size of it, he could tell the castle had its glory days. "We'll land there." Vivian landed right where she intended. Hao Ren could not wait to stretch to lessen the numbness in his arms. Although it was still summer, the cold, night wind at a high altitude was not very forgiving. He could have been frozen to death if he had stayed up there a little longer. As he gave himself a little massage on his arms, a white shadow flitted past with great speed, kicking up a cloud of dust in his face. The shadow stopped only after it crashed into a large rock, which was a few meters high several hundred meters ahead. A loud bang ensued. The rock was crushed into thousands of pieces instantly and someone was heard moaning in pain. Hao Ren ran towards the voice and found Lily, the werewolf maiden, lying there. She was completely covered in dust from head to toe. She finally awakened, albeit not naturally. Vivian was dumbfounded. Now, that pighead could moonlight as a jackhammer in a quarry. As Lily got up from the ground, one of her ears drooped lifelessly, possibly due to the impact. She shook off the dust and stone chips from her head and body. She seemed to be okay. She grabbed and swung Hao Ren's arm while she boasted, "Look, landlord, didn't I keep up with you guys? The winged vampire isn't that fast after all." Vivian tossed her hair and said, "Yeah, get real. The last time I checked, I was carrying a man. Why don't you do the same and we'll see who goes faster next time?" "Shoo, that's enough," Hao Ren chided and put the argument to rest. There was a moving light coming towards them, but it was still far away at the bottom of a hill. Without haste, he hurried Vivian and Lily. "We have to move now. We just attracted attention thanks to you, Lily, your great impact." The trio left the messy landing site and moved behind a mound. The mound, which was closer to the castle, offered a better view of the ruins. The Yorkford Castle was situated on high ground, but its location was not exactly strategic for a defensive position. The surrounding terrain was almost flat. The castle itself had mostly collapsed, leaving behind a large pile of grey stones. It appeared to be sitting on a rectangular-shaped foundation, but other than that, the castle was mostly unrecognizable and lifeless. There was a small group of lights nearby. A few tents and large vehicles could clearly be seen under the moonlight. The shadows of humans flashed around as they passed in front of the lights. Those people were most likely paranormal enthusiasts. There were more than a handful of them, but not as many as Hao Ren had thought. Ghost enthusiasts who went to great lengths like camping out in the wild at night to seek paranormal entities were still of the minority. Obviously, he was confusing ghost busting and a temple fair. Nangong has arrived, Vivian pointed to a distant moving pair of lights. It became clearer as it came nearer. It was the off-road vehicle of Angus, the lodge's owner. Nangong was sitting in the rear and he was seriously looking like a ghostbuster. Oh, wait. Hao Ren sensed that something was not right. He rubbed his eyes before casting his sight over to the distant darkness. Vivian, how's your eyesight at night? Pretty good for a typical nocturnal creature. Vivian nodded. Can you see that there are 3 dead trees in that direction? And under one of them is one. 2 large rocks. Yup, as clear as day, Vivian replied impetuously, but quickly came to a realization after what Hao Ren had said. Wait a minute, you mean you can actually see that? Hao Ren rubbed his eyes again. He did not realize he was having an unusual vision throughout the journey. Despite the darkness and the not-so-helpful moonlight, he could still see things as clear as day. The dead trees he had seen were at least 2 or 3 kilometers away, yet he could see each and every branch on them. This is what Raven 12345 was talking about. Hao Ren suddenly understood what Raven 12345 told him before he departed. Bioenhancement will be activated under the right circumstances. Is this what she was talking about? Hao Ren was in 7th heaven. Luck was not on his side up to that point, and he finally felt he had something to cheer about. Hao Ren was busy studying the changes his body was experiencing. He believed his supervision was part of what Raven 12345 had promised him when he went through the bioenhancement. He had no doubt about it. A normal human being could not have possibly seen things as far as 2 or 3 kilometers away, not even in the brightest daylight. He was engrossed in his newfound ability and totally forgot about his purpose of being there. The ability was not an inconvenience and his normal vision was not affected. His night vision was only activated by consciously focusing his eyes. It was like having inbuilt night vision goggles, which he could easily switch between modes to suit his needs. Raven was right. He was elated and he rubbed his temples. The bioenhancement is gradually being activated as my body begins to adapt. There are no side effects and the transition is pretty smooth too. Well. That's just a little night vision improvement, Vivian jeered. You're still just as normal in every other aspect. Don't forget, I'm a normal human being to begin with. So, a little more than normal is a huge step for me. Hao Ren said solemnly. Just imagine, if you never had more than $200 in your pocket for all of your life and suddenly, you were given $1,000 to spend all the time. How would you feel? The simile struck Vivian. Her eyes started to glow. See? Now you get it. Lily had cleaned off the grass and dust from herself. Glancing at the castle, she asked, when do we go in there? Landlord, any signal from your MDT? The tenant's supposed to be here now. Hao Ren realized he had a job to do. He scratched his head before flashing out his MDT. He then asked, hey, did you get anything? Nothing. There is still no sign of the target. Please stay where you are and wait. After that, the MDT went back to standby mode. Hao Ren knocked the MDT, trying to wake it up again. The device is pondering about life at the moment. Please do not disturb. It flashed a line of holographic message before falling back into silence. Bad manners. Hao Ren stared helplessly at the MDT before turning his eyes to the nearby camps. I wonder why those demon hunters just stay put at the campsite and not go into the ruins. Aren't they here for the ghosts? Maybe they're reluctant for some reason. Who wouldn't think twice about venturing into such ruins? Vivian looked up at the moon. The clouds are blocking the moonlight right now. If there are any wraiths in there, we'll find out now. Hao Ren became tensed instantly, but it seemed like the demon hunters at the campsite were ignorant of the changing atmosphere. Equipped with various strange instruments as well as dressed in weird robes, these ghost fans gathered in groups of 2 or 3 in front of their tents and vehicles. Hao Ren could hear their faint chatter and laughter. Some of them even spread out picnic blankets and started an outdoor feast. None of them were ready to hit the sack even though it was already midnight. They truly were a bunch of nocturnal creatures. It was more like a masquerade than a ghost-busting operation. Even the burly European men who traveled in one car with Nangong joined the booze party. Angus, the lodge's owner, however, was not eager to join them. He had a little talk with Nangong before getting back into his vehicle. He proceeded to head back to town. So, it appeared that Nangong had no plans of going back that night. Amid the hoo-ha, Nangong and the Indian monk stood out from the rest. They did not mingle with the others or carry any strange instruments with them. Some demon hunters, who were donned like alchemists, called out and invited the both of them for a drink. However, the duo did not give a damn about the boozers. They moved away, found a serene spot and began to inspect their instruments respectively. Nangong opened his black suitcase and took out a small but strange-looking crossbow. The little crossbow was more like a work of art than a weapon. Its size was so small that its actual usefulness was doubtful. Nangong carefully kept the crossbow close to his body. He then took out a strip of fabric with many small arrows attached to it and tied it around his waist. From the pocket of his suitcase, he flung out a monocle, like a prop on a movie set, and put it on. Presumably, these were all part of his preparation. Meanwhile, the Indian monk fished out a jar of spices from his colorful robe. He spread the spices on his own body and his surroundings while he muttered some incantations. Unlike the other frivolous paranormal enthusiasts, the tall, skinny Indian monk was totally solemn, composed in his conduct, and was more like a demon hunter than even Nangong. Hao Ren's eyes were fixed on the monk. He felt the monk had the temperament of a great master. However, not everyone could see that. The group of European men saw the spices. They bought a pack from the monk and used it to marinate their barbecue meat. Hao Ren had lost his faith in the demon hunters. Were they seeking out their own doom? Look. Hao Ren pointed at Nangong and the monk. His upgraded vision had enabled him to see every minute detail of their movement. These 2 guys really mean business. They're totally unlike the other jokers. It looks like they have something up their sleeves. Vivian frowned. Nangong seems to know the tricks of the trade. I thought he was just another charlatan. Look at his arrows, they're made of silver and contain anti-demon properties. The arrowhead are producing a bluish glow under the moonlight. However, the Indian monk's spices really make me uncomfortable despite the distance. Hao Ren was shocked. Vivian, the living fossil of the first-class blood clan, was wary of spices. The Indian monk's a real expert. I dislike curry, Vivian said as she frowned. I was in India a couple of years back. And after having their curry, I had bad diarrhea. Hao Ren had nothing to say. Suddenly, their surroundings became darker. Hao Ren looked up and saw that a thick layer of clouds in the night sky had completely blocked out the moonlight. At that very moment, Hao Ren faintly heard a soft whimper in the air. Movement in the castle. Lily's tail was in a puffed state and her golden eyes were glowing. There's light. Of course, Hao Ren had also noticed the movement in the castle. It happened just when the moonlight was being completely blocked. There were several beams of light in the castle ruins and they appeared for only a few seconds before going dark and reappearing in another part of the ruins. At that moment, a mysterious wind swept towards them from the ruins. There was no wind in their surroundings though. Hao Ren swallowed nervously. Holy moly, ghosts are real. The mysterious happenings in the castle ruins finally caught the attention of the ghostbusters encamped in the area. When the wind went howling through the cracks of the fallen pile of masonry and boulders, the camp became alive. A whole group of funny-looking experts were stumbling about with their equipment. One was fiddling with an odd-looking radio device, some were lugging cameras which looked 50 years out of date, some were swinging about holding curved brass instruments, and some just looked almost like Jedis right out of Star Wars. The whole group rushed in a horde towards the source of the sound in the ruins. Well, let us not talk about their actual combat abilities, but it seemed like the whole lot, with their funny outfits, may have spooked the ethereal residents there instead. Of course, Hao Ren had the impulse to rush head first into the fray as well. However, as he saw the horde of ghostbusters surging towards the castle, the first thing that came to his mind was, F***ck me, this won't be easy. Hao Ren was torn. On one hand, there was a chance his new tenant would be brutalized by the ghostbusters. On the other, there was also a chance of the new guy murdering everyone there. Things would not have been pretty either way, and the thought of Raven 12345 crucifying him alive sent chills down his spine. Just as he was about to rush in, Vivian pulled his collar. "Calm down, look at Nangong and that Indian monk." Hao Ren took a good look and found that the two supposedly most excited duo, at least for Nangong, with what was in the ruins, stood still. Nangong was staring coldly at the bunch of supernatural enthusiasts blundering their way towards the ruins. He made a curt expression at the old monk about the whole bunch of amateurs, while the monk's expression was that of a serene calm. Whether that was his normal air or his way of being unapproachable, he glanced at Nangong and went back to tending his incense. Hao Ren was puzzled at the disinterest that the two had shown towards the brouhaha in the castle ruins. What's wrong with them? The spirits beneath the castle are quiet. Vivian frowned. As for this, I'm not sure what is causing the ruckus, but it certainly doesn't feel supernatural. Those two probably have their ways of identifying a real spirit. Let's not talk about that skinny, old coot of a monk. Nangong is the real deal, at least in terms of equipment. That monocle of his looks very familiar, doesn't seem like your average one. The light within the ruins had faded by then, but the howling was incessant across the highland. Along with it, was a clarion call and sounds of cantering horses, just as Angus had described. The crowd by then had already reached the boulders and were scouring about with their various ghost hunting gadgets. Those without any tools just simply sat down and started to chant prayers as well as sutras. Thankfully, no one had actually gone deep into the rock formations. Even as enthusiasts, these people probably still had the presence of mind to stay safe, especially since they believed the area to be truly haunted. While all that was going on, Nangong and the old Indian monk had finished warming up. They started to walk slowly towards the ruins. Vivian, seeing this, tapped Hao Ren's shoulders and gestured him forward. "Let's go." "So, have the evil spirits been awakened?" Hao Ren asked, sounding really edgy. "Not yet, but something is definitely going on." The red glow from Vivian's eyes faded. She turned around and smacked Lily on the head. "You stupid dog, stash those ears and tail of yours. Do you want to be exposed?" Only then did Lily realize she was in her feral form and quickly hid her otherworldly appendages. She quickly asked, "What should we do if we run into Nangong?" "Let's try to avoid that. We'll go around the place." Hao Ren pointed towards the other side of the ruins, where a huge crack ran through the wall. "Let's not get entangled with the crowd. We'll try to get to the target as sneakily as possible. If we really run into someone, just hoodwink them into thinking we're ghost hunters like the rest. The same goes for Nangong as well. We aren't friends or anything, so we don't have to go into the details." Hao Ren knew what he said was a best-case scenario. If Nangong or the old monk were to sniff out what was going on, things would get nasty. They seemed to have genuine abilities to detect spirits, and Hao Ren was very sure that his new tenant was one of the spirits there. Running into Nangong or the monk after collecting the package was nothing but trouble. So, he thought the best way to avoid all of that was to avoid everybody. It was by a stroke of good luck that Nangong and the monk were cooped together with the horde of ghostbusters on high ground. Hao Ren and the gang then managed to sneak in from the other side through the crack. The ruins itself was a big place, and even if there were people brave enough to go in, Hao Ren believed that he would not run into anyone for a while. That is, if he was careful and the other two managed to not muck up one way or another. "Wow, this place really got messed up," Hao Ren said as he slipped through the crack on the wall. What he saw was an empty space littered with rubble. It appeared to be part of the castle's long hall, but with part of the masonry collapsed and the wooden structure rotten, it was no different than an empty plaza now. The only telltale signs of its original use were the surviving structures around it. Vivian looked around with a tinge of melancholy. Time really does change everything. I used to dream of having a castle of my own. People those days thought that vampires really did own castles. But I couldn't even afford a small parcel of land. Hao Ren patted Vivian's shoulder to comfort her. Let's not reminisce about your sad past. You can't even afford it now. Can you not? Standing within the castle ruins, the howling sounded even clearer. However, it was due to the fact that there were plenty of rocks and wall structures which echoed the sound. It was pretty difficult to pinpoint the source of the howling, and Lily took a good while to even get a bead on its general direction. I think it's coming from there, Lily said as she pointed. I'm using my human ear, so I can't hear it clearly. Hao Ren looked towards the direction Lily was pointing at and found a rare structure that was still intact. It was rectangular in shape, almost like an independent structure by itself. Maybe because of that, it had survived the collapse of the castle. Seems like a small chapel, Vivian surmised. I've seen the layout of castles like this. This stone building is definitely a chapel. A haunted chapel. This sounds just like those horror flicks. Hao Ren thought Vivian had hinted at something else and asked, "Did you find anything?" "Nothing of importance." "Did you manage to detect the person?" "Nope, nothing yet." Hao Ren was puzzled as well. He pulled out the MDT. "Hey, have you detected anything?" "How would I know?" The MDT retorted defiantly. "That's your problem to solve. Lady 12345 said that if the new tenant is within a certain range from you, the sensors will trigger. If there's nothing, that means you are not at the right place. Go look around. Based on the information, it should be close by." Hao Ren had half a mind to smash the MDT on the rocks. The other half was deathly afraid that he would have no way to fix it later. All he could do was muster a violent stare at the super, high-tech device and carefully stow it back into his pouch. At the same time, on the other side of the ruins, the group of Ghostbusters had started doing their stuff. One was carrying a big radio, wired to a boatload of antennas protruding skywards with a giant spare battery pack. With his headphones clamped tightly onto his ears and his fingers carefully manipulating the dials of his improvised, spirit listening device, the man suddenly screamed. "I hear it. I can hear it. The spirit went into me through the antenna. I can feel it within me." Another man, dressed like an old detective with an old monochrome camera, stared angrily at the man. "Please be quiet. I'm trying to capture the spirit's picture. And oh, your headphone seems to be broken. I saw sparks earlier. Spirits. I see spirits floating above the castle." A middle-aged lady clad in purple screamed as she sat still on a rock. Her eyes turned white as she chanted. An even older witch beside her was even more outrageous with her chanting. She was foaming in her mouth. Nangong, with his monocle on, stood amongst the delirious crowd. He only shook his head in amusement. Behind him was the Indian monk, and both of them lowered their sights. They did not seem to be staring at the ground but through it, at whatever that was hiding underneath. Hao Ren did not know what the enthusiasts were up to, but with the gear that was on them, he could roughly figure it out. Vivian, on the other hand, was brutal in her assessment. "Those clowns there, a bunch of swindlers they are. Only Nangong and that monk seem somewhat legitimate." Lily went about sniffing the floor. After a while she lifted her head and went, "Someone was here. Well, there have been a whole lot of visitors coming to the ruins. That's not really surprising." Hao Ren shrugged and he slowly made his way towards the chapel as cautiously as he could. "This sounds really scary. You sure everything is okay?" "No problem. The spirits are still entombed underground." Vivian looked around as she activated her magical sight. Her eyes were a flash of crimson in the dark. "Listen, the howling has weakened." Hao Ren gulped as he noticed that the howling from the castle had indeed weakened. Instead of reassuring him, it increased his uneasiness. While he could not feel or see the dead, the place was royally haunted to him. The wooden door had already rotted away, but the entrance was barred by some fallen masonry. Hao Ren slowly closed in towards the structure and found a slit amid the boulders. He took a peek through it and saw only darkness on the other side. There were little traces of wind alongside the cries of men and sound of horses coming from the building. As the structure was riddled with holes everywhere, it seemed like the weird noise within the building was not impeded and therefore audible throughout the castle grounds. Hao Ren licked his index finger and placed it into the crack. He solemnly nodded. Yes, there's no wind. Of course, if there was, you would have been covered in dust and debris when you were peeking. Vivian pushed Hao Ren aside and waved towards Lily. Over here, doggy. Move this out of the way. Hao Ren was a little queasy. Wait a minute, won't this disturb the dead? What dead? I've fought real mummies before. Heck, I've even faced off with the Pharaoh's guard as well. Go, doggy. I dare you to say that again. I'll give you a big chomp if that's the last thing I do. Lily was getting increasingly infuriated by Vivian's obvious disrespect towards her and protested menacingly. That said, it was a job well suited for Lily, who was all brawn, so she went about moving the boulders. As Lily tossed the first boulder aside, the noise from the chapel ceased. It stopped. Hao Ren exclaimed. I think I heard something in there. Did you guys hear it? Vivian slightly nudged her head towards the chapel, trying to catch the noise Hao Ren heard. At the same time, she gestured towards Lily. Pay no heed, keep moving. Hoorumph. Lily grunted as she lifted a boulder which looked like it weighed a ton. She lifted it with ease and tossed it a good few meters aside as though the boulder was nothing. Hao Ren wisely stood a few meters away from Lily, fearing that the dumb werewolf would accidentally kill him with a stray toss. Nonetheless, he was still amazed by her feat of strength. If only I had such strength. She's all brawn only. Vivian twitched as she looked at Lily moving the boulders. She was smiling curtly. The true source of strength is knowledge. Strength alone is no match for my blood magic. Just a curse alone will fell. Go on, Lily said as she turned around with a boulder lifted over her head. Hao Ren, who was beside Vivian, quickly scrambled aside. Stup. I'm just a normal person, you know. I'll die if that lands of me. If you two want to duke it out, let's go somewhere with no one around later. Lily hissed bitterly and turned back to continue her labor. It was not long before the boulders were cleared from the entrance, with the last one being kicked away. The entrance of the chapel now stood open for them. Mr. Landlord, my shoe's torn, Lily pointed towards her foot. Hao Ren took a glance and found that her white sport shoe had been torn open and her toes stuck out gloriously. Remember, she kicked that last boulder earlier. Other books do not even dwell on minute details like this. I'll get you a new one once we're back home. I suppose this counts as work expenditure. Hao Ren wiped the cold sweat of his head, ruining his fortune thus far. He carefully made his way into the chapel, curious to know what was actually inside. Nonetheless, the sense of unease had not left Hao Ren. Even the bravest of men would not have rushed headfirst into an enclosed stone room, which was the source of an eerie howl. With Vivian, who was ever proficient in sensing the dead, reassuring him that it was safe and Lily being a world-class bodyguard, Hao Ren steeled himself for the ride. After all, he still had his pride as a man and feared that he would lose face in front of the two ladies if he backed down. Although the entrance was previously sealed by the caved-in boulders, the chapel itself was not in perfect condition. A crack here and a wreck there, it was pretty well ventilated. Hao Ren could not tell anything was rotting in there until Lily jumped in and kicked up a cloud of dust. Vivian frowned at the impetuous werewolf and a slight breeze formed. It blew away the dust around them as Vivian directed her spell with the usual grace of a vampire. Lily spat at her. Oh, a little bit of dust and dirt's not befitting your stature, eh? The chapel itself was empty. The pews and pedestals were long gone. All that was left were fallen bricks scattered on the floor. The design of the chapel had a medieval feeling to it with tall, narrow windows flanking each side of the wall. The glass windows were also long gone and the pale glow of the moonlight seeped through the narrow window slits, making the place look even more eerie. The moon's out. Lily stared at the windows. Mr. Landlord. I feel like letting out a howl or two. Hao Ren had nothing to retort. What kind of bloody habit was that? Using his obtained special ability, Hao Ren could clearly see what was in the chapel. There was nothing out of the ordinary. No will-o'-wisps floating about, no hollowed knights cantering about on their skeletal steeds and no magical grimoires scattered on the floor. It seemed like everything had ended even before he stepped in. The chapel was but an ordinary chapel. Lily got on all fours and started sniffing. Mr. Landlord, there was someone here, I caught a scent of a living person. Vivian walked towards a corner of the chapel and waved towards a stone panel. A gust of crimson mist rushed towards the panel and a sizzling crackle rang as the mist ate through the panel violently. It was not long before the panel was nothing but ash, revealing a small entrance into a burrow. Whoever the person was, he ran through here. A person? You mean whoever pulled that stunt was a living person? How did you know? Hao Ren looked at Vivian in shock. Why didn't you tell us earlier? I did sense a living being hiding in here and I wanted to see what he was up to. Never thought that he was the one playing pranks. Vivian shrugged. He ran away after Lily tossed the first boulder aside. So much for having acute senses. A human slipped away under your nose. I was busy lifting boulders. I wasn't paying attention. Lily angrily retorted. Hao Ren ignored the bickering duo and went towards the entrance of the burrow. Should we go in there? You can wait up here if you want to. Vivian took a look at the burrow's entrance, clearly unfazed by it. Although I'm pretty sure that it's just a normal person, we still don't know what's underneath, so there could be danger. What Vivian said rubbed Hao Ren the wrong way. He was destined to be the king of babysitters, with so many oddball tenants coming his way. Surely, a man playing ghost in a castle's ruins could not so much as faze him. Get out of my way. I'm a vanguard, Hao Ren said as he pushed the ladies aside. Without any more thought, he leapt into the burrow. Fuuak. Hao Ren was sure he had taken a good look. He had gauged that he was manageable distance away from solid ground before taking that leap of faith. It did not take long for the glorious Fuuak to echo throughout the place. His brash action caught both Vivian and Lily by surprise. Lily quickly stuck her head through the entrance and yelled, Mr. Landlord, are you okay? I'm fine. It's a giant cavern down here. Hao Ren yelled back as he squinted to adjust his vision. His voice was overcome with amazement. It was pitch black down there, way darker than it was outside. Except for the faint moonlight that came through the entrance, there was no other source of light in the cavern. It was difficult for Hao Ren to make out the place even with his night vision ability. Only by fully concentrating was he able to see with any form of clarity. It seemed that his night vision ability was still bound to normal optical limitations and he had a long way to go before he could visually scan the area using just his mind. Well, that in itself was a long shot. He was not even sure if his current ability would evolve with time or mastery. Hao Ren landed on a ledge after he leapt. It was probably made so that whoever needed to use the passageway had an easier way to get back to the surface. Ahead of the ledge was a slight slope leading into something which amazed Hao Ren: tunnels, giant tunnels. The castle was built upon solid ground and the vast cavern was more than proof enough of the fact. In fact, it was so vast that Hao Ren could only gawk in awe. It was much bigger than the usual underground structure one would see in normal castles. Hao Ren stood in front of a tunnel fork, with each of the 3 tunnels leading into another equally vast area. The tunnels appeared to have been built using giant boulders and pillars made out of unknown material. It was even more surprising that they actually stood the test of time. As an amateur in construction engineering, Hao Ren was awed. Each tunnel could have easily fit a car in it. Their ceilings were about 3 meters high from the ground, with the tunnels converging into a T-junction in front of him. Needless to say, there were probably grander and larger areas further in. It looked like the chapel was a convergence point where many tunnels crossed each other. Hao Ren was still staring at the tunnel structure when Vivian and Lily came up behind him. They had taken his lead and followed him using the same slope to his location. Wow, the Lord of Yorkford was definitely something. This underground structure is beyond normal. Vivian knew from experience that the scale of the tunnels did not match the structure above ground at all. Could it be that this castle was under a long siege before? And the amount of refugees were so great that he needed such a big space. There's even a junction. Hao Ren looked at Vivian quizzically. I thought you've never been to England after 1190. How do you know about the architecture of English castles built after that? I've been wanting to ask you this since just now. Yes, I wasn't in England for a while but I was around continental Europe. Vivian gave Hao Ren a bitter look. Yes, I was poor but it wasn't because I couldn't afford the toll that I didn't visit England for almost a millennium. I was visiting somewhere else. The castle structure and layout in this region is almost the same anyway. The only difference is probably the scale but still it's not that foreign to me. By then, Lily had already circled the area, sniffing for clues. She suddenly sprinted towards one of the tunnels as she caught the scent of human. She eagerly called for the two. "Over here, there's someone sent here." Hao Ren felt that he was no different than AK-9 officer with Lily as his sniffer dog. The three of them followed the trail of the scent in what could be called an underground castle. The scale of it was simply huge. Hao Ren was worried that the air would thin out the deeper they got into the tunnel, but the air was surprisingly fresh and a slight breeze could be felt from time to time. It did seem like there were pockets of air tunnels leading to the surface that were still open. This added to the mystique and awe Hao Ren had towards the Lord's effort in creating the underground fortress. Vivian was busy analyzing the place. "I thought the castle lord was just your run-of-the-mill noble, but it does appear like he wasn't someone to be trifled with. The building of this underground structure would have taken an enormous amount of resources. However, this area is located on a flat plain and it's not a strategic military location. It really boggles me as to why the Lord of Yorkford would painstakingly build this. Was it because of a betrayal that the castle had to be abandoned?" Hao Ren mused. "Or because of a series of civil wars that led him to build a fortress like this?" "Oh, you ignoramus," Vivian glared at Hao Ren. "You think it's easy building something like this a few hundred years ago? It would have taken generations for it to get to this scale. I think the lords of Yorkford had been expanding and reinforcing this place for at least 200 years. Besides, this is England, not China, where peasants could be mobilized in the millions to build a wall. A lord of a normal English holding would have had very limited manpower at his disposal. How did he do it?" Vivian quickened her step as she took lead. By then, the darkness around them was absolute and Hao Ren's night vision was totally rendered useless. He dug his pouch for the MDT and used the screen as a makeshift torch. The area around them was lit up instantly by the bright screen. Curiously, a red line ran across the screen of the MDT as the device protested, "Usage error. Usage error. I would suggest that you look for a more conventional approach." Hao Ren ignored the MDT and moved forward. After a few minutes, Hao Ren felt that they were slowly descending, as though the path they were on was leading into a deeper part of the labyrinth. He had totally forgotten about Nangong and the bunch of supernatural enthusiasts above ground. Somehow, the total darkness underground was a good thing. He was far away from the crowd and if he ran into the target there, it would make things much simpler. "So, is it true that this place is haunted?" Lily uncharacteristically approached Vivian to ease her boredom. "I wonder who it could be. Is it true that there are ghosts underground?" The one trying to spook us is definitely human. I can't quite fathom why he would want to do this though." Vivian shrugged nonchalantly. "As for ghosts, why are you shivering, Mr. Landlord?" Hao Ren could not help but cry. "You guys just King reminded me about the ghosts down here. I was trying to keep them out of my mind but now, gosh." Vivian cynically patted him. "Oh, don't you worry. Meeting one will be part and parcel of your job." Lily, who was now taking point, started sniffing again. "Just ahead, there's someone near us. He seems to have stopped moving." The straight stretch that they had been moving in finally came to a bend and a faint glimmer of light could be seen around the corner. Hao Ren wanted to go in head first but was restrained by Vivian. "Wait up, I think it's better if we put on a cloak of invisibility. Better to hide our identities if we run into a commoner." A swirl of mist rose around Vivian as she spoke. Since Hao Ren had a weird immunity to magic, she was unable to cast her illusion spell on him and had to rely on an area of effect spell to hide themselves. Hao Ren looked at the swirling black mist around them and really felt like they were the ones best suited to haunt the place. Vivian softly reminded the two. "Stay within the mist. And you, doggy, stop wrinkling your nose. This mist is actually minty, you know. I also got rid of the blood scent just to shut you up, so, no complaints." Under the cover of the illusionary mist, they slowly approached the bend and caught a glimpse of someone's back. It was a short, stocky man with a mining lamp over his hard hat. He was lugging a strange box and milling about in front of a stone wall. It was Angus, the lodge owner. Angus. Hao Ren recognized the man ahead from his back. His dumpy figure and the slightly bald patch on the back of his head had left a deep impression on Hao Ren. He's the one creating all this mess. Angus had yet to notice what was behind him. His attention was fully focused on the dark, stone wall in front of him. The towering stone wall blocked the tunnel, turning it into a dead end. Angus was anxiously leaning on the stone wall, groping for any hidden buttons or exits, but it all seemed like a waste of effort. It was unclear how long he had been struggling there. Angus was wearing a headlamp and carrying a strange black box on his back, which looked like a self-powered stereo. He was obviously not there by accident. He was in fact entering the place for a purpose. Angus was the first person who reported the incident of the strange sound coming from the chapel. It was so obvious that Hao Ren immediately associated him with the incident. He walked 2 steps forward without covering up his footsteps and finally got Angus's attention. The tubby boss shivered furiously when he heard the movement behind his back and froze like he was just shocked by electricity. The 3 of them waited patiently for a few seconds. Angus finally turned around like a stiff puppet, still trembling. When the beam of his headlamp swept across the dark tunnel, the owner saw a dark cloud of undulating fog swarming before him. He was shocked and let out a piercing shriek. Ah! This was definitely not a scene a normal man could take. The sudden screams of the lodge owner frightened Hao Ren. Now, both of them were frightened by each other. Vivian waved him quiet with her hand. She then cleared her throat, speaking in a sharp and weird tone, "What are you doing here?" Hao Ren threw Vivian a weird look and thought, such a crafty vampire. You even got an audio mixer in you. Angus was shivering even more when he heard the scary sound coming from the dark fog. He forgot to answer Vivian's question but kept making the sign of the cross. He was sweating heavily while saying, "God, protect me. God, please save me. I didn't do anything bad. I did nothing bad. I'm asking you. What are you jabbering about?" Vivian spoke with her devilish voice in an uncouth manner. "Hey, can you please stop trembling? I will release the dog if you don't cooperate." Hao Ren thought for a few seconds and pulled Vivian's sleeve as he whispered, "You can't communicate with anyone here with that level of English." Vivian was silent. "Let me ask him." Hao Ren could not help but push the silly vampire aside. He knew that it was better to disguise his voice as well. Therefore, he communicated with the mobile data terminal, MDT, in his head and asked, "Can you alter my voice? Like Vivian did hers. Alter your voice. RCH 365B plugin installed. Now, nobody can recognize your voice." Hao Ren felt the air in front of him was condensed in a strange way. He quietly thanked the advanced technology of aliens and said, "What are you doing here?" His voice echoed through the tunnel like a dull thunder. After finishing his sentence, Vivian poked his back and said, "Hey, do you have to exaggerate so much? You sound like a villain." Hao Ren helplessly expressed that he could not control the alien digital assistant. None of its functions actually worked well. Even though the fake voice created by the MDT was a little too much, the coercive evil voice successfully frightened the lodge owner. Angus was pulled out of his incoherent praying right away. He sat on the floor and begged, "Oh honorable souls of the knights, I'm just a small businessman living nearby. I didn't mean to disturb you. I live near Yorkford. Yes, I'm from Yorkford, under your reign. Can you please let me go by virtue of the knight's code?" Evidently, Angus took the dark fog in front of him and the horrible voices coming from it for the real ghosts. Though he was the man behind the scenes, he did not look daring at all. He lost his head easily when faced with an unusual situation. Hao Ren thought it was all just a misunderstanding at that moment. Therefore, he did not expose himself and continued asking, "Are you playing tricks in the castle every day? Were you the one responsible for the mess in the castle during these past 2 days?" Angus was surprised that the dark fog could talk to him. Although he was still trembling, he became calmer when he found that the evil ghost could possibly communicate with him. It was me, but I did it inside the castle. I didn't mean to alarm the souls beneath. Why are you doing this?" Angus wondered why the ghost knight in the dark fog was curious about what he was doing. However, he dared not ask too much. He just answered whatever questions that were thrown at him. "My lodge was going out of business, so I wanted to create some kind of hype, but I didn't expect it to become so famous. The truth had come to light. The uproarious case of Yorkford's haunted castle was just a fraud. It was fake news created by a bleak business owner in order to attract tourists. Perhaps Angus did not expect things to go so far. Apparently, he underestimated the power of idle media and the strong execution of the ghost hunters. It was beyond his expectation that a small case of a haunted castle would be magnified on TV and developed to such an extent. Hao Ren took advantage of the lodge owner's cooperativeness and grabbed the chance to get more details on the night's happenings. The details of his tricks were getting clearer little by little. The will-o'-the-wisp which appeared in the castle was just a light set up in the crack of a rock earlier. And the howling of the wind echoing through the castle was simply coming from the big speaker box on his back. Everything was just so ridiculous. Angus was an old resident in the town of Brushire. He had been living there since he was little. He was mischievous and he used to run around the town when he was a teenager. During that time, he used to explore the castle frequently. That was when he discovered the crypt under the castle which somehow had not collapsed. This was a secret that nobody knew. The remote town rarely attracted visitors. Though the situation was not too bad many years ago, things were going downhill in recent years. It was difficult to maintain the business. When the lodge almost went out of business, Angus finally drew his attention to the old castle. Brushire was not a business hub or near the thoroughfare. It did not have any special products as well. The only possible way to attract visitors was the old castle. If the castle became a tourist spot, the business problem could then be easily solved. Hence, Angus got this daring idea, the haunted castle. All that mattered was to make it famous. The tricks were carried out according to his plans during the past few days. He was familiar with the structure of the castle and knew where to hide the props. Also, he was cautious of its surroundings. He could always pack his things up and leave the spot before the daring ghost hunters entered the ruins. The secret tunnels and doors under the castle were another advantage for him. Even when people suddenly popped up in the castle, he could always leave the spot or hide himself via the secret doors hidden in the castle. No one was aware of the secret doors or tunnels in the castle at all. Through Angus's hard work, every curious tourist who visited the castle would get him free publicity. As such, the rumor of Yorkford's haunted castle was spread fast. Of course, another reason that allowed the rumor to continue developing was people's boredom in general. People did not mind visiting fake haunted houses in the park, not to mention a real haunted castle. Now, there was one bizarre incident left unsolved. When Angus reported the hauntings to the police, he mentioned a case where many had seen the blaze coming from the castle. It was not one of his fabrications and he was so confident about witnessing the big fire even when facing Hao Ren. The bizarre fire was in fact the inspiration for the idea of a haunted castle. What happened to the fire then? The castle was dozens of kilometers away from Brushire. Even if there were only plains and nothing blocking the castle along the way, it was almost impossible to see a fire on the castle from the town. How big was the fire on the castle that people from town could see it from such a distance? The fire would have probably set the entire hill ablaze. However, there was no way of knowing the details. Angus had no idea as well. They could then confirm that other than the fire, the rest was fake and Angus was the man behind them. People were nosy. If someone claimed to see a UFO, the people around would automatically follow each other's gazes and agree with it. Angus did not expect to have no one debunking the fraud. This allowed the story to keep going on. Angus had no way of backing down and just kept the ball rolling. However, was it really all just a fraud? Angus's tricks had failed for the first time. He did not expect anybody to break into the chapel, which had been blocked by huge rocks. Usually, nobody could move those heavy rocks away without the help of a crane. Angus's plan was totally disrupted by the monstrous wolf who appeared out of the blue. He was in too much of a panic to clearly see who actually opened the door of the chapel. In order not to expose himself, he did not turn on his headlamp to look at the door. He was alarmed and quickly moved underground via a secret tunnel the moment Lily moved the first rock. After considering that the secret tunnel could have been discovered as well, he did not stay there but moved towards the exit following a route he memorized. However, the previously unobstructed tunnel was now blocked by a stone wall. You mean this tunnel was unobstructed earlier? Hao Ren was slightly surprised after listening to Angus's explanation. Are you sure you're remembering it correctly? I've been using this tunnel for quite some time, it can't be wrong. Angus was too frightened to think straight a moment ago. However, after talking to the ghost in the dark fog, he slowly came to his senses. He felt something was off and asked, aren't you the ghost of this castle? How is it that you aren't clear of the situation underneath? This has nothing to do with you. Just think of me as a visitor from the nearby graveyard, just stopping by this place. Can't a ghost have some privacy? Hao Ren simply created an excuse and continued asking, so, does this mean the castle isn't haunted at all? You've been playing tricks all along. Ah. Yes, answered Angus, and he peeped at the swarming dark fog under the beam of his headlamp. It was the first time he ever saw a real ghost in his life. He thought it was quite different from what he had previously imagined and continued to explain, I really didn't want to disturb the honored souls underneath. I just borrowed the top part of the ruins. I really meant no harm. People often do this in today's age. It isn't wrong to make money from cultural relics. If we think about it from another angle, there could be an opportunity for the castle to be repaired and renovated. You're really good at creating stories. Hao Ren thought that the lodge owner had quick wits. He could create big news out of nothing. Hao Ren then turned to Vivian and whispered, now what? What to do with this tubby man? So, are you done asking? After confirming with Hao Ren, Vivian lifted her finger and pointed at Angus. That's it. A faint, red light split from the dark fog and faded into Angus's body in a flash. He fell onto the ground without a sound and remained motionless. Hao Ren immediately jumped and said, hey, I was just asking you how to get rid of him, not kill. I just stunned him temporarily. Vivian gave Hao Ren an odd look and said, what are you thinking about? Did you watch a vampire movie again last night? I told you not to watch those kind of movies too much. They are misleading. Hao Ren had nothing to say. He glanced at the chubby owner on the ground and felt it was not suitable to leave him here. He then signaled Lily to come over and said, send him up there and put him at a safe place. And keep an eye on those ghost hunters by the way. Okay. Lily nodded. She picked Angus up lightly and ran out swiftly. Hao Ren shook his head as he watched Lily run out. He found the whole situation annoying yet funny. So, this is it. The lodge owner was actually quite creative. Although Angus had bamboozled everybody, Hao Ren did not really blame him. It was not a serious crime after all. Additionally, there were other marketing gimmicks from various tourist spots and theme parks. Angus's idea could not possibly compete with them at all. However, the whole case really left him speechless. The uproarious haunted castle was merely a simple idea created by a lodge owner to attract more customers. Nobody found out about the mystery within. It really shows that life is just a joke. Of course, Angus's plan would not have lasted. More and more paranormal enthusiasts came and gathered around the castle. There would have probably been some kind of expert or retired expert and scholar from the TV program, Approach to Science, among them. Sooner or later the lodge owner's tricks would stop working for them. Hao Ren could tell that the Angus did not plan to stop at all. The haunted castle brought him non-stop customers. On top of that, the trick was not going to be exposed at that particular moment. The TV program kept adding fuel to the flame in order to increase audiences' ratings. How could the lodge owner stop? He just repeated the hauntings every few days. Anyway, it would have been exposed sooner or later. You see, wasn't it finally exposed? A trick. Vivian turned around discreetly and curiously examined the stone wall in front of her. The unusual scenes people have been seeing may be some kind of deceptive trick. However, there really is something under the castle. Hao Ren remembered his task at once. The stone wall in front of them was also still a mystery. The dumpy bossman probably wasn't lying. The stone wall appeared out of the blue, but where did it come from? It didn't fall from the top. Vivian pointed at the marks on the stone wall and continued to elaborate, look at the scratches. It probably slid down from the top corner not long ago. This is a well-designed structure. It enables the stone wall to slide down and block the tunnel when needed. Just when Hao Ren was about to say something, he heard footsteps coming from behind. He turned and saw Lily running towards them. Lily saw Hao Ren and reported immediately. I've sent the lodge owner up there. And those ghost hunters have already departed as well. They've gone. Vivian was surprised. However, she quickly realized something and said, of course, that paranormal phenomenon has ended. They probably couldn't find anything suspicious after roaming around the castle. After all, they aren't professional demon hunters. They are just a group of amateurs. Did you just dump the tubby owner in the middle of the wilderness? Asked Hao Ren while he looked at the silly, werewolf girl. There aren't any wild animals out there, are there? Don't worry. He was about to wake up when I left him. I saw an old man taking down his tent, so I threw him into the back of the old man's car. He should be on his way back to town along with the tent, answered Lily. She had turned back into a werewolf. She was wagging her tail vigorously. Don't worry, landlord. Nobody saw me. I'm as speedy as the wind. But the bat spell didn't really work. The bossman just slept for a few minutes. It's better than how you swing bricks. Also, I purposely suppressed my magic so that wouldn't sleep too long. If not, he could easily sleep forever. Do you know how difficult it is to control magic precisely? Defended Vivian. Hao Ren looked at Lily's tail and was not sure if she was really as speedy as the wind. However, her tail did cause the dust to swirl in the air. Will Angus spread any nonsense after going back? Muttered Hao Ren worriedly. Vivian derided him while she examined the stone wall. She said, stop fussing. Whatever he says has nothing to do with us. The worst thing he could do is create another rumor of a haunting. Plus, he didn't see our faces. I found something. Hao Ren stopped thinking about the lodge owner at once. He moved closer to Vivian and asked, what is it? Here. Vivian pointed at the upper half of the stone wall and said, do you see the letters and symbols? Hao Ren squinted for a while and said, so, those are letters. I can hardly see their edges. And no, how come they don't look like English? They look a little like Egyptian. They are neither Egyptian nor English. They are not from a human language. Vivian narrowed her eyes. Red lights were glittering her eyes. These are letter runes used previously by demon hunters and the church. It came from an ancient family of demon hunters in the early days. It later became a crucial means for the secret forces in the church to fight against the unusual clan. An important feature of the letter runes was that common people were able to use them. However, as humans got stronger day by day, the runes lost their importance as well. I haven't seen letter runes for more than 200 years. Hao Ren swallowed nervously and asked, what's it for? Hao Ren was aware of the castle's eeriness. He also knew that there were real ghosts underneath. Therefore, he was sure that the runes and stone wall did not suddenly appear for decoration purposes. They had to be something significant. It's used to repress demons, evil beings, ghosts and indestructible, evil objects with unholy power. Vivian pointed at a few lines of runes which had already been corroded by time. She then read, this door obstructs the root of all evil. It stops evil forces from penetrating. The moment the door drops, all guards will move out. The moment the door drops, all guards will move out, Vivian read as pointed at the last line of the runes. This sentence is also written in runes. That's weird. It was the first time Hao Ren was involved in such an ancient and puzzling scenario. He was stunned, feeling like he was in a Hollywood blockbuster. Is it anything unusual? Perhaps the person who wrote this had obsessive-compulsive disorder. He felt uncomfortable forcing himself to insert a line in English under the runes. Besides, you wouldn't understand the English sentence even if it was written there, said Hao Ren. Vivian rolled her eyes and said, do you think the utility bill notice stuck on people's doors would be written in ancient Latin? Who the heck would be able to read them? The letter runes are complicated and ever-changing. The runes can even have a certain impact on the learner's mind in the process of learning. Average people are unable to handle it. Only demon hunters and ascetic monks with rock-hard minds are able to endure the impact. It is said that the letter runes are texts written for the spirits of heaven and earth as well as deities of a different dimension. Therefore, under normal circumstances, it won't be used for humans, let alone used to write a common message. Could it be the guards weren't common people? Lily chipped in suddenly. Vivian looked at the werewolf girl in surprise and praised her. You're quite smart, big dog. What Lily said sent a chill down his spine and he quickly looked around nervously. He swallowed hard and asked, they used demon hunters as guards? Is it possible that this place was actually the demon hunters' headquarters back then? Demon hunters don't have headquarters. They spread out freely across the world. Information on internal contact between branches of demon hunters is still a myth. However, the Lord of Yorkford must have gathered a large number of demon hunters here, said Vivian as she floated lightly in the air, examining the runes and drawings on the stone wall more closely. Look at these lines. They were carved in an extremely precise and complicated way which allowed 3 groups of runes to take effect at the same time. This was done through the writing order and arrangement of runes. It's a brilliant technique. The Lord of Yorkford was definitely not an ordinary nobleman. He was most probably a demon hunter who had already blended with the human species. I've seen things like this. Although Lily was also an alien, she was as confused as Hao Ren. Her mind was full of question marks at this point. She stepped forward and scratched the hard, stone wall. Hey old lady, can you stop showing off old stuff? Just tell us directly what the heck it's for, said Lily impatiently. Vivian raised her voice instantaneously as she closed into attack. It became chilly and the atmosphere was filled with a metallic smell of blood. Who's an old lady? Hao Ren hurriedly dragged aside the wolf girl, who never thought things through before speaking. Then, he said, just ignore her. You're the forever 17, beautiful girl from the Blood clan, okay. Let's focus on our business. You keep protecting her. Vivian exclaimed scornfully and gently landed beside Hao Ren. The sentence patterns found in the runes are solely for the purpose of repression. It's nothing aggressive, just a simple defense layer. And the 3rd line of runes state that this is a crypt, which is repressing the root of all evil. It has been sealed forever. The stone wall can't be opened without the power of the blood of Yorkford. Otherwise, one will be cursed by the demon in the cryptan. Before Vivian could finish speaking, a deep rumbling suddenly came out of nowhere and echoed through the crypt. Soon after, the ground started shaking violently. It got stronger and stronger. The walls around them created a horrible grinding noise. Dust and crushed stones kept falling from the top. The quake was only getting worse. Hao Ren lost his balance and immediately thought it was an earthquake. They were going to die in the ramshackle crypt. The unknown, rumbling noise was becoming louder. It quickly reached an unbearable degree in a matter of a few seconds. It was like thunder. The moment Hao Ren closed his eyes and prepared to have his life flash by, it stopped abruptly. The earthquake had stopped and so did the weird sound. Only dust and gravel which occasionally fell from the top indicated that it was all not an illusion. Vivian floated up into the air the moment the quake started. She remained poised and unhurt. Lily protected herself in her own canine way immediately after the quake started. She laid down on the ground and protected her head with her hands. She was trembling fiercely from her head to her tail. When the quake stopped, Lily stood up sheepishly and giggled. Was that an earthquake just now? Hao Ren was still in shock. With an odd expression on her face, Vivian said, no, it wasn't an earthquake. It was the thing under the castle. And Angus said this route was clear before. Hao Ren was not a fool and reacted at once. The stone wall just appeared. Most probably the seal in the crypt became loose and triggered the stone wall to fall. Vivian took Hao Ren's hand and ran towards the exit and said, run. The passageway behind them was no longer there. It was blocked off by another massive stone wall, which looked even more solid than the stone wall with runes. When did this happen? Hao Ren was astounded. He ran to the stone wall and knocked it to make sure it was not an illusion. He then said, how are we not aware of this? It's a demon hunter's trick. They're the best at setting this kind of freaking trap. Vivian's eyes were covered in red light and her tone was full of anger. She swung her hands forward and 2 red shock waves in the shape of crosses hit the massive, dark stone wall hard. However, the red shock waves which could have crushed any metal and stone just left a scratch on the dark, stone wall. It was totally not powerful enough to destroy the entire stone wall. Bastard. Even this wall's protected by a spell. We're trapped. This time, Lily took the initiative to step forward and tried to break the stone wall. However, after trying everything she could, the stone wall still stood there firmly. The werewolf girl immediately dropped to the ground and sobbed. I don't want to die yet. I've never even been in love yet. I'm still a cub. Hao Ren was already drenched in cold sweat. However, looking at Lily's reaction, he could not care about himself. He could not bear to watch the wolf girl cry. Hao Ren helped her up and encouraged her. At the same time, he looked around and said, "Calm down, don't panic. Let's find another exit." At this point, there came another strange noise. The eerie noise, which sounded like armor colliding, came from behind both sides of the walls. There seemed to be some space around the tunnel. Vivian tried to break the walls on both sides of the tunnel. However, she quickly drew her hands back and asked, "Both of those walls aren't protected by spells. Do you dare to get out from there?" The Wraith Knights had weapons in their hands. Some wielded long swords and wore hammers while some carried short swords and shields. The tombs were carefully arranged in a way that when the Wraith Knights rose up, they would immediately fall into formation. The Wraith Knights outside the tunnels were supposedly of the same type, except they were buried and trapped under tons of rubble. Hao Ren had never seen anything like it. His mind went blank, but he managed to keep cool thanks to years of reinforcement from absent-mindedness and carelessness. He tapped Lily's shoulder as he spotted an exit at the other end of the hall. "Head to the exit." The Wraith Knights were not fully awake. They did not notice the trio as they rose from their tombs. Taking advantage of this window period, Lily kicked a Wraith Knight out of her way before hustling towards the exit. Unfortunately, Lily had kicked over a beehive. The hobbling knight suddenly became alert. Countless blood-red eyes came to life under the head armor, illuminating the crypt in a terrifying shade of red. "Get out of my way." Lily was getting nervous. She grabbed the Wraith Knight that was charging towards her and swung it like a warhammer. The 180 centimeters tall Wraith Knight was totally helpless against her brute strength and random combat tactics. It was flung around like a warhammer and a large group of Wraith Knights were smashed. They flew everywhere in chaos. The big dog truly has something up her sleeve. Vivian looked on with satisfaction as a whirlwind of extreme cold fog formed around her. The cold mist was blood-red, expanding outwards in all directions. Nearby Wraith Knights were instantly frozen in a thick layer of frost. "Big dog, pull back. The crypt's their territory. Let's go to the surface." The murky underground of the palace was the home turf of the Wraith Knights. Such confined space had crippled Vivian's and Lily's ability to fight at their best. Vivian was a high-flying vampire, whereas Lily was a terrifying werewolf with brute strength. Thus, an open space under the moon would make them feel more at home. Lily brandished her improvised warhammer to fight her way out like a ravaging tornado, while Vivian emanated a freezing chill and shock wave the likes of a Bloody Mary to ward off the heavily armored Wraith Knights. Being immortal was not going to be the right excuse at that time. Hao Ren had to fight with all his might in order to stay alive. He was not sure whether it was just an illusion or real or simply adrenaline rush. His strength had become so unusually powerful that he could send a beefy Wraith Knight flying 5 meters away. And so, they made it. They were finally outside the crypt. However, there were more plated armor sounds ahead. The sound made by the plated armors resonated through the tunnels of the crypt. There was no way Hao Ren could figure out the enemy's position and number. The trio retreated as they fought. They had been trapped in the crypt tunnels for dozens of minutes and still could not find the exit to the surface. Hao Ren relied on the MDT to navigate through the complex tunnel system. Without the device, he would have been as good as blind. Humans are strange creatures, so weak yet, so strong at the same time. People often display extraordinary strength in the face of challenges, and Hao Ren was one of them. However, he felt that his strength was a little ludicrous. He was already gasping for air after some intense fighting. Nevertheless, he showed bravery and strength despite the onslaught of a legion of fearsome wraiths. While the wraiths were armed, they were clumsy and had seemingly forgotten how to use their weapons. They were clearly not fully awake. Making use of his agility, Hao Ren managed to knock down some wraiths that came his way. He only experienced minor pain in his leg and stomach. He was in high spirits and felt strong, but he paled in comparison to the two maidens. His power was just child's play. Lily swung her warhammer with sheer strength to clear the way ahead. The wraith had a bad day as it was grabbed and swung like a hammer from one tomb to another. The armored wraith ended up like a pile of scrap, and it had stopped making any sound for a long time. Life had seemingly left the wraith's body. How far to go? Vivian was the most elegant of them, and without much stress, the first-class vampire unleashed her specialty, blood magic, on the wraiths. She flew close to the ceiling and used her cold shock wave and Bloody Mary blade to kill wraiths from meters away. Farther away, the power would not have been easy to control as there was a risk of the tunnel caving in. Bodies of armor were strewn along the path. Some were slain into pieces while some were simply frozen and turned into ashes. The walls of the crypt were left with countless battle marks. But Vivian was worried just like Hao Ren. She could not reach her full potential in the confined space. Does your radar work? I can only fly a meter high. This place cramps my style. Ouch, I hit my head again. So far, her injuries were only of her own making because she flew too high and hit the ceiling. We're only halfway through. Hao Ren was exasperated. We overshot the exit earlier. Now, we've got to go through another crypt. Lily, I'm talking to you. Watch where you're heading. All Hao Ren heard was only a muffled roar from Lily. After battling for so long, Lily had probably gone bonkers, he thought. Has she gone crazy? Seeing Lily behave strangely, Hao Ren was worried. Looks like werewolves are prone to be crazy. Don't worry. She's okay. I just saw her taking out a piece of bread from her pocket. She ate it as she ran. They came to the end of the passage yet, another crypt was awaiting them. Hao Ren was praying that it was not another graveyard. He could not withstand any more onslaught from wraith knights. His prayer was answered when he saw that the crypt before them was empty. There were no wraith knights, no tomb covers on the floor, nothing. A shield knight approached from behind. Hao Ren was too exhausted to confront it head-on. He leapt forward and rolled his body into the empty crypt. He then shouted to Vivian, "Seal the passage." As the three of them escaped into the crypt, the vampire maiden immediately transformed into thousands of bats. The bats split and formed two swirls in the air. The tips of the cone-shaped swirls pointed towards the passage entrance and a blinding blue light formed in front of the swirls. Seconds later, the swirling bats charged at the passage entrance all at once. Half of the passage collapsed with a boom under the extreme impact. The sound of falling stones and objects resonated in the crypt as the passage caved in. Even things were falling from the ceiling in the crypt. Hao Ren had to cover his head and he screamed, "Is this place collapsing?" "Don't worry. I got it under control." Vivian's voice seemed to be omnipresent. As the bats regrouped, they transformed back into Vivian. Then she descended from the air with a smirk. "At last, the space is large enough for me to exert my power. What do you think? After a little chat with Faraday, my lightning strike move can now produce a twin arc." Hao Ren was speechless. Although the passage behind them had been cut off, they were not out of danger yet. There were a few sword knights that managed to skip through before the passage collapsed. These sword knights, which became more agile and clever after some warming up, took cover at the corners when the passage crumbled. They staggered to their feet and raised their swords to attack the intruders. How many people are actually buried here? Hao Ren was breathing heavily. Did the last York Ford owner bury his entire army down here? Like the Terracotta Army, the English version. Do you know why after so long, their numbers are still so many? Vivian had noticed something. She pointed at the sword knight which had been struck by Lily. That won't kill them. The sword knight hit the wall and broke into pieces, arms, limbs, breastplate, helmet and whatnot strewn all over the floor. However, seconds later, the pieces came together and assembled themselves back into an armored knight. It seemed like those things are hollow inside. During the battle, Hao Ren did not observe the armored wraiths carefully enough. Nonetheless, he could finally see through the gaps of the armor. Did we just fight with a bunch of empty metal-plated armor? It's spirit-possessed armor. Nice. Vivian emanated a fierce storm, freezing the empty-shelled knights until they crumbled into a pile of ashes. Unless they are turned into ashes or beaten into pieces, they'll resurrect in no time. By this time, Lily had snapped out of her violent werewolf state. The warhammer she held was clearly dead. All that was left was a limb. She turned the limb upside down. See, it's really hollow inside. I should have beaten them harder. Is this the demon hunter's magic? Hao Ren drew close to Lily, poking the hollow limb. He asked, "Is there a spirit inside?" "It's gone. Once the armor turns into ashes, the spirit will also be destroyed," Vivian said in a tone of voice which was full of disdain. These things were fanatics. They were ready and willing to be sacrificed, to be placed into the armor. People called them hero souls. Essentially, they were a bunch of avenging spirits. Their obsessive behavior has little difference from that of avenging spirits if you noticed. Don't be surprised, there will be more to come. Hao Ren just smiled at her. He noticed that their surroundings were unusually quiet. That's weird. Is the hostile party gone? The crypt was so silent you could hear a pin drop. There was no more sound of grinding plated armor. So, we're safe. Hao Ren took a long moment to calm his breathing as he stared at the silent, stone crypt in disbelief. The tunnel behind them had been completely sealed off after the lightning strike explosion. Their pursuers were blocked off by the collapsed tunnel. Even if the Wraith Knights were physically strong, they were made of metal. Metal had a finite strength. So, the Wraith Knights could not have possibly dug through the sealed tunnel, at least for the time being. It was time for a break to collect his thoughts. Maybe not. Vivian closed her eyes and felt the energy flow from the crypts. The aura of the wraiths are everywhere, but I can't explain the spooky silence. The wraiths behind us are just a small group of the army. Holy moly, a small group. Hao Ren exclaimed in shock. What was the castle owner thinking of? Lily had gone on the ground to check out the fragments of plated armor. Equipped with the natural instinct of a canine, she searched through the fragments as though something had attracted her interest. Then she found something, a twisted piece of chest armor. Hey Batty, take a look. What's this? Are these letter runes? Doggy and Batty. It looked like they would not be calling each other by their actual names for a long while. Vivian kicked Lily's leg in protest before bending over to pick up the armor fragment. Sure enough, the silver metal plate had some squiggly patterns on it. Unfortunately, the plate was broken and the runes were not completely legible. Let's see whether there are other fragments. We might be able to find something readable. I'll help. Hao Ren came up and joined Lily. They searched high and low for fragments. Most of the plated armor were frozen and they shattered under sub-zero temperatures. Literally none were in one piece. After some laborious searching, Hao Ren established that almost all Wraith Knights had runes on their armor. The runes were inscribed on the same piece found on all of the armor. Their size and pattern were also identical. It appeared that the armor were the result of a mass production. Found it. Lily was the first to find a whole piece of armor. She handed the 1 square foot metal plate to Vivian, who immediately deciphered it. The Warden, Watcher, sleepless warrior of the demonic chamber, under the order to defend the power of the demon, to drive out intruders, are not allowed to enter the demonic chamber, a covenant imbued and affected within the runes. Hao Ren could not make sense of it. What does it mean? Looks like we've got one thing wrong. There was a subtle change in Vivian's expression. We initially assumed that the wraiths were the objects of the sealing mechanism and the avenging Wraith Knights were being confined down here. But little do we know that the Knights are actually part of the crypt's defense mechanism. They're the guards here. There's something else being held down here. Hao Ren looked thoughtfully at the metal fragment in his hand. He had guessed it from the beginning, the buried army was a thoughtful arrangement. Full core, well equipped, no matter how one looked at it, these knights were not the prisoners. Instead, it made more sense to say that they were the guards of the crypt. Demon. The word struck Hao Ren as Vivian deciphered the runes. This isn't funny. Don't tell me that the one being held down here is a demon. How on earth can demons exist at all in this world? If the blood clan like me and heir, werewolf like Lily exist, why not a demon? Vivian threw the armor fragment on the floor before corroding it with her caustic blood flog. Then she spoke in a grave manner. Humans made tons of errors in their records of mythology. A lot of the violent, foreign creatures have been summarized and categorized as demons. I'm not sure whether the demon described in the runes is a demon or something else. It better not be the real thing or else, it's going to spell big trouble. Vivian paused for a few seconds before continuing. Judging from the standard of the runes on the stone wall, the crypt was supposedly designed by the demon hunters. Demon hunters are experts who wouldn't make such a silly mistake in the categorization of unusual creatures. Most likely, the one being held down here is an actual demon. Hao Ren's face twitched. It'd be better if you didn't say that last sentence. Vivian did not take notice of Hao Ren's denial. She carefully surveyed the floor for armor fragments with runes in the hope that she would find out exactly what kind of demon was being held down there. On the other hand, Lily was anxious. Did we just take out the knights tasked to guard the demon? Did we just commit a Himalayan blunder by letting the demon out? The world would be a better place if all werewolves were as kind-hearted as the werewolf maiden. Hao Ren patted her on her back and said, "Don't worry, the MDT said the crypt's seal had long passed its expiry date. The armored knights would not have been able to hold the demon back by themselves. We're just an accidental accomplice, at most." "Not necessarily. The runes say it's a demon stone," Vivian explained as she picked up another armor fragment. "There's a place called the demonic chamber, as described in the runes on this quiz. This secret chamber holds the demon stone, not the demon itself. So, it isn't as bad as you think." That sounded like a double Dutch to Hao Ren. "What demon stone?" "The demon is an apt manipulator of power in the dimensions of space. Demon stone is like a position tracker in their travel between spaces. It's also a remote medium which they use to corrupt the human world, much like their double. The demon stone is made of very special material, not the kind of stuff that demon hunters can destroy. So, the standard treatment would be to confine it, as long as a few hundred years. Basically, it's pretty secure." "I see. So, the demon stone will exhaust its power after a few hundred years?" Hao Ren said assumingly. "Not really. Usually, the demon will replace it with another demon stone when they lose contact. Pretty much like what you do when you lose your phone." Hao Ren was quiet. The explanation sounded reasonable, but he still found something amiss. "That means the demon stone is still in the crypt and it's still working." Lily was naive but not dumb. She gulped and said, "Let's hope that the demon behind the stone has changed its number. The disturbance in the crypt seems to have excited the demon stone." Vivian thought for a while before continuing, "Most likely the demon will come back to check the stone out just like what you do if you get a message from your lost phone. It would recognize the signal coming from the lost stone." Hao Ren fingered his temples and said, "What's most important is, are you guys able to take on the demon?" "We're not sure." Vivian looked a little awkward. "Theoretically speaking, we're neck and neck, but there are also less powerful demons out there. However, as you know, I'm a peaceful person who despises conflicts. During the war between the Greeks and the people of Troy, I joined the army only out of necessity because I was broke. Even then, I fought for both sides. Each side for 5 years respectively." Hao Ren was speechless once again. He did not care to pick at Vivian about her monumentally black history. Lily gained some quick wit and something suddenly crossed her mind. "Oh yeah, Batty, what do the runes mean by, guards are not allowed to enter the demonic chamber? Although the Wraith Knights are kind of an effective weapon, their power comes from the demon. As such, they're only useful in guarding the demon stone from afar or around the crypt, not too close to the secret chamber. Have you noticed that this crypt is empty? Not a single Wraith Knight's here." A thick silence ensued and filled the crypt. The trio had felt a stream of cold air blowing from all directions. Hao Ren carefully scanned the stone crypt and woefully asked, "Vivian, how does the demon stone look like?" The vampire maiden started to recall. "Basically it's a long and thin crystallite, half a meter to a meter in length, irregular shaped and black like smoked glass. The tips are slightly red in color." Hao Ren almost cried out in fear. "What's that thing dangling on the ceiling?" Four gigantic chains hung forebodingly from the rock ceiling of the big chamber. Where the obsidian, black chains met, a claw-shaped metal structure that formed a twisted iron cage was mounted. Within it, a black crystal was held. What they saw was just as Vivian had described, a meter odd in length with jagged edges protruding out from the main body. The crystal itself had the hue of blackened glass, almost obsidian-like with a tinge of blood red visible along the edges. All three of them did not pay attention to the structure hanging on the ceiling when they first stepped into the room. Lily at first thought it was just a weird ornamental decoration, not being the sharpest tool in the shed. However, both Hao Ren and Lily began to realize the gravity of the situation. It was the demon stone. Hao Ren felt a faint vibration from the MDT and a deadpan voice echoed in his head. "I'm feelin' really SA." "Hush it, shut up." "It can't be." Lily fell down, seated on her butt. "I'm still a wolf cub. I haven't even met my mate yet." "Quiet. Hao Ren hushed Lily as he smacked her head. It's a rock. We are not sure if it will. Vivian immediately interrupted him with a deadpan tone. What do you think triggered the defensive mechanisms in the crypt, or had those metal tin cans waking up? Hao Ren gulped. It was pretty obvious. Something resonated with the demonic rock. Say, would this be considered a critical situation beyond the ability of a mere human? Hao Ren sheepishly activated the MDT and looked for the combat support function. Is it okay if I call for reinforcements now? Nope, not even close. You haven't even seen the foe yet and you're already calling for reinforcements. Do you have any sense of shame? The MDT spat back viciously. Hao Ren really lost it and screamed. What the actual F***CK? Do I really need to get myself almost killed before I can call for reinforcements? That's how we, at the Space Administration, roll, buddy. Hao Ren almost burst a vein and got himself an aneurysm. A sudden violent shake within the crypt pulled him back from the brink. He realized that he was in a deeper pool of crap and fainting was not an option. Dust and debris from the ceiling rained over the entire chamber. While the quaking was still ongoing, a spine-chilling crack thundered from amongst the rocks. The hanging chains rattled violently and the claws, which held the demon stone, shook too. From the outset, it looked like the claws would withstand the quake, but after a few stir-ups, the claws started to loosen their grip bit by bit. Hao Ren wanted to leg it instinctively the moment the floor shook, hoping to find something to hide behind. But, as he caught sight of what was happening to the suspended cage, he forgot about it. The trio could only lock their sights on the hanging demon stone, as if enchanted by the magical crystal. With every shake, their hearts skipped a beat. Even Vivian did not have the guts to grab the thing out of the air. They could only stare at the iron claw's loosening grip. Soon, one of the chains finally gave way. The heavy metal chain swooshed through the air and headed towards the wall at the far end of the chamber. Nary a moment later, a deafening crash rumbled throughout the room. As the grip of the metal claws finally gave way and the chains broke apart one by one, the black crystal fell, crashing onto the ground in a crimson gleam. It flashed as it came into contact with the surface. Hao Ren had plenty to say at that point of time. What the F***CK was with the gothic aesthetic of that design? Could the bloody fools not have made a proper, solid cage to hold the demon stone in place? And which F***cur was it who insisted on the claw design? Run! Lily screamed as she ran towards the nearest tunnel passage. The fur on her ears and tail rose in a hackle the moment the demon stone crashed on the floor. As she lifted her feet, a crimson nova blasted out from the demon stone. Hao Ren saw a series of runic wards appearing on the walls of the chamber. Not long after, they faded in quick succession and a shattering blast no different than that of a broken window echoed throughout the chamber. My God! The runic wards did not even last a second. As the wards faded away, Hao Ren heard something very familiar. Clank! Clank! Aside from that one tunnel that had collapsed, there were 3 other tunnelways leading into the chamber, and the clanking of armor was clearly audible from all sides. Lily managed to get a few meters in front and she quickly turned tail as she saw a sea of red glow floating in the dark. With it, an even more terrifying number of armored wraiths marched in rows into the chamber. Since the wards failed, the wraiths could now enter the chamber. The armored wraiths that appeared this time were different. Gray mist swirled about their armor and a blood-red glow shone from the eye slits of the helmets. The unholy energy from the demon stone had clearly taken hold of the crypt guards. As Vivian said, while the armored wraiths were protectors of sacred grounds, they were still spirits driven by unfulfilled desires. Their creation made use of techniques that were taken from a demon icon. They were useful when the crypt was sealed, but, under the sway of the demonic rock, they turned into living nightmares. Bloody demon hunters. Vivian let out a frustrated roar. Out of nowhere, another loud blast rocked the chamber from above. Dust and debris rained across the chamber again as a giant slab of the ceiling collapsed right on top of Lily. She did not even have time to look up and leap as far as she instinctively could to avoid being turned into fine paste. While she escaped mostly unscathed, her tail was caught underneath the rocks. Hao Ren could only hear the pitiful whine of a dog having its tail stamped on. What's going on up there? Hao Ren felt that the subsequent quakes were unnatural, more akin to explosions. Why am I hearing explosio? As he spoke, the center of the roof came crashing down. Moonlight shone through the gap as the dust settled. Someone had blown a hole right through the crypt. The armored wraith simply stopped moving as the roof collapsed, perhaps confused by the sudden ray of moonlight. Hao Ren and the rest could only look towards the gaping hole in the ceiling. What was the deal with that? And the roof was directly underground. Can we go up through there? Lily asked as she leapt to Hao Ren's side, her tail wagging as she stared at the hole, her golden eyes filled to the brim with curiosity. Hold on, something's not right, Vivian signaled them to stop moving as she blew the dust off her face. Hao Ren saw a rope being lowered into the chamber through the hole. Hao Ren cursed in his heart as he saw the figure coming down the hole. It was that bloody demon hunter, Nangong. Someone somehow had blown a hole through the chamber's ceiling, which led straight to the surface. Hao Ren and the girls were still confused and dazed by the explosion that rocked the chamber earlier. They then caught sight of a rope being lowered into the chamber and someone very familiar appearing before them. A tall, lanky, well-dressed and well-groomed man. Who else could it be but Nangong? He was still lugging that black luggage of his and a well-crafted crossbow dangled from his belt as he slid down the rope using his free hand. Hao Ren immediately realized that the source of explosions earlier was this self-professed demon hunter. He almost had a sudden urge to brick Nangong in the face if not for the timing of things. Vivian and Lily reverted to their humanoid form as Nangong made his appearance. Despite being surrounded by armored wraiths, Hao Ren was confident that even in their human form they could hold their ground without much of a problem. The problem now was Nangong, as none of them could discern his intentions. It was very evident that he stayed behind after the crowd left. By then, Nangong had reached the ground. He leapt lithely around the rubble for a flat spot and finally had the time to look around. The first thing that caught his eye was the three familiar faces with their gawking mouths staring at him. He recoiled in surprise at the scene. Eh? You three. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Lily retorted at the same time. My job. Nangong looked puzzled. I was trapped in the tunnels above and wanted to blast my way back to the surface. Never thought that I'd blow the floor apart as well. I saw that there were flat surfaces through the hole and came down to have a look. Bugger. How much explosives did he actually use for this? Was this demon hunter wannabe in a hurry to kill himself in the most explosive way possible? Wait, now's not the time. Hao Ren exclaimed as the armored wraiths regained their senses and began to converge towards the chamber in droves. It seemed like the runic inscriptions on the armor was still holding out against the demonic influence. Their movement was sluggish and indecisive, but the red glow in their eyes became even brighter. It appeared like the demonic influence was overwhelming the wraiths, almost to the point of losing control. Nangong finally realized the gravity of the situation he was in as he saw a flood of armored wraiths with their glowing red eyes heading towards him. Wraith knights. And what's with their size? Hao Ren was still thinking about how he was going to explain three normal people wandering around in a crypt to Nangong. However, Nangong had already gone on the offensive. He deftly pulled the crossbow from his belt and threw his luggage down to open it. Nangong quickly grabbed a vial from the box and threw it as hard as he could at the armored wraith that was closest to him. At the same time, he aimed the crossbow towards another direction and pulled the trigger. A silver bolt whistled onwards with murderous intent. As the vial broke against the armor, it released a cloud of silvery dust, seemingly infused with magic. It did not dissipate as it was released into the air. Rather, it quickly covered the armor and dug its way through the gaps in the armor. The silver bolt fired from Nangong's crossbow landed on the face guard of the wraith. The bolt shattered upon impact and released a silver light lancing straight into the helmet. Quickly, hide behind the rocks. Nangong yelled as he reloaded his crossbow, aiming at his next target. I'll hold them back. These things are slow. Find a chance to run and don't worry about me. Hao Ren had wanted to brick Nangong so hard when the demon hunter appeared, but he was having second thoughts. While he was far from competent as a demon hunter, he seemed to be a decent guy at the very least. He acted nothing like the callous bastards Vivian described them to be. Nangong fired his crossbow repeatedly at the wraiths as he slowly stepped backwards, approaching one of the boulders lying on the ground. Thanks to him blowing a hole through the roof of the chamber, the fallen boulders became a somewhat effective makeshift defense work. Hao Ren and the rest hid behind the rocks as ordered by Nangong. With the chamber no longer a death trap, the sluggish wraiths would have not stood a chance against a flying vampire or a wall-climbing werewolf. That said, the girls had no intention of revealing their true forms in front of Nangong. They were still wary that Nangong could be the real deal, as his gadgets seemed to be authentic at the very least. Hao Ren decided to wait and observe. If things changed for the worst, he would let Vivian and Lily loose. Exposing their identity sounded like a way better an option than being killed after all. If Nangong could take care of the matter, it would be a bigger plus. Nangong was panting after several sequences of shooting and reloading his crossbow. He quickly pulled out a piece of paper with words scribbled on it in red ink. Hao Ren took a glance and realized that the scribbles were letter runes. Although letter runes could be used by common people, it was still a demanding task. One would need enormous spiritual strength to ward off the effects of using the runes. Who is this Nangong actually? Keep your heads down. They will attack anything that moves. Nangong took a glance at Hao Ren's position and said, "Leave them to me. Fret not, I'm a bona fide exorcist. Evil, begone." As Nangong yelled the incantation, the charm lit up on its own. Nangong, however, seemed to be holding the charm the other way around. He was holding on to the part that lit up. Ouch! Hot, hot, hot! Nangong jumped as his fingers were scorched by the flames. The charm fell limply on the ground and the flames died. He quickly picked it up and blew the dust off. He then shouted, "Evil, begone! Evil, begone! Evil, oh, the fire charm has already burnt out." Hao Ren had wanted to see the demon hunter go all out against the wraiths, but to his disappointment, he only saw Nangong rummaging through his pockets for a lighter. He lit the charm up again and threw the charm towards the wraiths. This will work. A blinding, red light followed the explosion and then, nothing. Vivian simply could not take it anymore and went, Mr. Demon Hunter, are you forgetting something else?" Nangong looked up and saw the armored wraiths that fell earlier had come back into being. It seemed that the silver powder and bolts only stunned the tin cans for a moment. Hao Ren wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. The demon hunter came in guns, crossbow, blazing, displaying his magical and martial prowess, but in the end, it was his explosive entrance that seemed to have some significance. "How could this be?" Nangong said as he leapt backwards. "This shouldn't have happened. This stuff should have been effective. No worries, I still have my trump card." Nangong quickly pulled out an assortment of gadgets and with trained hands, quickly assembled them into an arbalest. The tip of the arbalest gleamed a beautiful silver under the moonlight. Hao Ren finally stopped twitching his eyes as Nangong seemed to have gotten his **T together. "Humph. This is not child's play," Nangong said as he took aim. "Feel the wrath of a demon hunter's silver explo, **CK me, I forgot my bolts." Vivian could only facepalm at that sight. "Doggy, get ready. That man is a hopeless." "Wait." Hao Ren restrained the two as they were about to morph. He glanced at Nangong, who was fiddling with his gadgets. He felt that the man was nothing but trouble. Even as a half-boiled demon hunter, he was still trouble. Hao Ren wanted to get rid of the trouble. At the very least, to ease his worries of a real demon hunter coming up behind them. He quickly looked around for something solid, but the rocks on the ground were either too fine or too big. As his hand swept past his pocket, he felt something solid and smiled menacingly. Hao Ren quietly made his way towards Nangong with the solid object in hand. He swung it as hard as he could to the back of Nangong's head. At the same time, a screech echoed in his head. "You definitely haven't read the user manual. There is definitely something wrong with your way of doing things."